The boy demands to know why nobody listens to him. He orders the magic sphere to shine. The girl calls Kento Kokuben worthless, says he does not belong there, and tells him to go wherever he wants. Kento is transported into a forest and wanders without direction. Furious, he swears to make the girl suffer. Hungry and exhausted, he realizes he does not know where the nearest city is. Hearing something behind him, Kento suspects someone is hiding in the darkness. Monsters emerge from the shadows. Believing they are goblins, Kento panics and runs. As they surround him, he curses the girl for abandoning him there. One goblin bites his arm. Kento tries to escape despite the pain, but realizes the creatures intend to kill him. Another goblin grabs his legs and knocks him down. Helpless, Kento wonders why supposedly weak goblins are so dangerous. In a game, he could have defeated them easily, but reality is different. Kento begs them to stay away as they tear into his body. The goblins begin devouring him alive. His final thought is that he does not want to die. Kento desperately wishes to return home to Japan and begs someone to save him. Several hours earlier, a scream echoes through the school. Kento wakes in confusion. All second-year students and teachers have disappeared from their normal surroundings. He remembers falling asleep during class and awakening after the building was transported elsewhere. The unfamiliar environment makes it obvious they are no longer in Japan. One student calls the situation unbelievable, while another tells him to calm down. A girl introduces herself as Camellia Reisenberg, third princess of the Kingdom of Reisenberg. A student asks whether they were summoned as heroes. He also demands comfortable treatment, including at night. Camellia coldly explains that they are not heroes, but soldiers summoned to fill the kingdom's ranks. They may obey, complete their duty, and return home with a reward, or resist and die. Kento realizes Funyama has provoked the princess and that they are merely expendable soldiers. Funyama refuses to obey, and the guards immediately restrain him. As he struggles, Camellia repeats that their only choices are submission or death. Someone requests permission to ask a question, and Camellia agrees. A girl asks whether completing the mission will truly allow them to return home. Kento admires class president Yuka Isakawa for remaining calm. Camellia explains that summoning magic can bring beings into this world, but cannot send them back. She then begins evaluating everyone's magical abilities. The appraisers identify medium-level wind magic and powerful water magic before calling the next student. Hashimoto observes that touching the blue crystal reveals a person's class and magical strength. Claiming journalistic instincts, Hashimoto also discusses the bracelets given after the test. He suspects they prevent magic from going out of control. Kento finds the possibility of uncontrolled magic destroying everything exciting. Hashimoto reminds him that he has no magic. A sudden burst of blinding light then comes from the crystal. Kento sees that Yuka Sakana caused it. Camellia identifies her rare light attribute and realizes the summoning produced an unexpectedly valuable result. She immediately praises Yuka and escorts her to carriage. Meanwhile, girls surround Takayama after he proudly reveals his powerful fire attribute. Kento watches the basketball player show off and feels intense disgust. Camellia calls Funyama next and impatiently orders him to hurry. Funyama confidently steps forward to discover his skill. The appraiser identifies amber earth magic and calls him weak. Camellia laughs as his pride collapses. Funyama demands another test, but Camellia says the result will remain the same. Camellia points to Kento. He prepares to reveal what he expects to be overwhelming cheat magic. Kento dramatically invokes the crystal of Lucifer's eye and the darkness of the abyss. He places his hand on the magic sphere. Nothing happens, and the appraisers declare him a complete failure. Shocked, Kento is offered another attempt with a smaller sphere. He claims the tiny sphere will probably shatter under his power. The second test also fails, confirming that he has no detectable magic. Funyama mocks Kento as a loser. Kento becomes furious with him. A soldier asks Camellia what they should do with Kento. She coldly says he is free to leave and go anywhere he wants. Yuko protests that Kokubun is one of them and asks whether he can be returned home. Kento sees her as an angel. Camellia says returning him would prevent the others from going home. Yuko asks that he remain with them instead. Camellia calls Kento useless, but Yuko argues that abandoning him is inhumane. Camellia offers one chance. If Kento crosses the storm forest, reaches the city, and enters the barracks, she may accept him. Kento is left alone in the forest, expecting goblins to eat him. He screams that he does not want to die and begs for help. Someone suddenly attacks the goblins. Kento initially assumes his rescuers are even stronger monsters. During the fight, he somehow helps the skeletons defeat the goblins. Confused, Kento demands an explanation. A skeleton says she is ready to answer his questions. Kento is shocked that he can hear the skeleton speak. The voice sounds directly inside his head. The skeletons bow, call him their lord, and swear to obey and protect him. Kento asks whether he summoned them. The skeleton knight confirms it. He introduces himself as Reinhard and says they are knights sworn to their master. Their previous squad was ambushed and killed after failing to protect that master. Kento insists he has never used magic and failed yesterday's test. Reinhard explains that summoning them proves he possesses rare necromancy. Kento assumes necromancy caused the failed test, but Reinhardt says dark magic should have turned the sphere black, making his result unusual. Another skeleton knight asks to speak, and Kento requests his name. He introduces himself as Baston, commander of his squad. Kento admits he cannot distinguish the skeletons because they all look identical. Baston suggests Kento possesses both light and dark magic, which cancel each other and prevent the sphere from reacting. Kento accepts that possibility. He then remembers the goblins tearing out and eating his intestines, yet his body is now fully healed. Reinhard believes Kento's opposing magical powers exist in a unique balance. Either both elements are perfectly equal or his dark magic cannot be detected by the sphere. Kento realizes he can heal fatal wounds and summon 10 skeleton warriors, giving him extraordinary cheat-like powers. Although his thoughts sound childish, he is relieved to have protection through the forest. Kento begins moving forward but stops when the skeletons behave strangely. Reinhard warns that orcs and large wolves are ahead and that the weakened undead may fail to protect him. He suggests strengthening 3 knights with magic stones taken from monsters and the remaining skeletons. Kento refuses to sacrifice his warriors through something resembling cannibalism, but Reinhard calls it an honorable ascension to heaven. He says dying by Lord Kento's hand would be an honor. Kento wonders whether he should send them all at once. Reinhard explains that the survivors must carry on the fallen knight's will and protect their master. Kento chooses to preserve Reinhard and the 2 captains, Baston and Fred. He chose the rest for ascension. Kento then thanked his warriors for coming to his aid, but he couldn't contain his emotions. One of the skeletal warriors tried to console his master, asking him not to cry. He expressed gratitude for the opportunity to ascend and said that without Kento, they would continue to wander in a state of restlessness. The warrior added that he was sure that family and friends were waiting for them in heaven, so he asked to send them off with a smile. Kento expressed his gratitude, saying that he was very grateful and wished the warriors peace. The skeleton warriors addressed the commander and informed him that they would leave everything to his discretion and were happy to serve. They asked him to take care of Kento for them. Reinhard assured them they needn't worry. After examining the magic stones he had obtained, Kento counted their total number, 18 pieces, including those collected from the goblins. He determined that there were 6 stones per warrior and asked how to use them. Reinhard explained that some monsters eat stones, but in their case, simply holding them to their chest is enough. He also asked Kento to use his necromancy to help them. Kento admitted that he'd used his power subconsciously last time and didn't know how to do it again. He added with a smile that he hoped Reinhard wouldn't turn into a perverted macho. Reinhard suggested that it would be better if Kento presented a stronger image of themselves. Kento understood the task and began to think about how exactly to create this image. Reinhard expressed confidence in his master, encouraging him with words that they believed in him. Kento promised to try and offered his warriors to take the magic stones. Reinhard readily agreed to carry out the instructions. Kento began to create images in his mind. He imagined Reinhard as heavy, shiny tungsten, machined to perfection. For Baston, he chose the image of titanium, and for Fred, carbon fiber composite. As the warriors took on these forms, Kento exclaimed in surprise, realizing how impressive they had become. He thought the new shapes made them 3 times more terrifying than before. Kento humorously noted to himself that he would probably be scared if he encountered such creatures at night. Although he couldn't quite believe the changes that had occurred, he was struck by the power of the transformation. He compared their transformation to upgrading characters to SSR level in gaming parlance. Suddenly, a sound came from the goblins in the forest. Kento guessed that these monsters were attracted by the bodies of the slain goblins. Reinhard confirmed that this is exactly what happened. However, Kento noticed something strange and exclaimed in amazement. Reinhardt pointed out with a light laugh that the ogres had already arrived. He approached Lord Kento with a proposal to join the battle to demonstrate the new capabilities of his subordinates. Kento gave his warriors the command to finish off the enemies. Reinhard assured the gentleman that they could handle it and set about the task. Kento noticed that Reinhard was smiling with excessive enthusiasm and thought that it looked rather strange. With one blow, Reinhard chopped off the ogre's arm. The battle ended quickly, and the warriors easily defeated their enemies. Reinhard expressed admiration for his new body, noting its incredible capabilities, and even let out a satisfied laugh. Kento was surprised at how quickly Reinhard's personality changed, noticing his new enthusiasm. The commander thanked the Lord for the new bodies and weapons he and his comrades had been given. He vowed, along with Bastian and Fred, to follow Kento and protect him. Kento, while admitting that he was not an ideal master, still expressed hope for his loyal subordinates. Reinhard asked the master to give names to their weapons. Kento agreed and named Reinhardt's sword Graham. For Bastian's spear, he chose the name Jabalg. Fred's twin swords were named Levitain and Daneslave. Reinhardt accepted the names and then asked why Kento was heading to Walzard. He noted that going through the demon forest was tantamount to suicide. Kento asked again in surprise, naming the demon forest. He was overcome with the suspicion that someone wanted to get rid of him by sending him to such a dangerous place. Reinhard confirmed that the demon forest was too dangerous for individuals to venture into alone, and pointed out that it was best not to venture there without a good group. Kento realized that it was impossible to get through the forest alone, and he thought with irritation about the princess who had probably set him up. Then he asked a question, reminding them of the purpose of their conscription. If they were called up as soldiers, would they have to fight someone? Reinhard suggested that the nearby region was located near the kingdom's center, but far from the borders of other countries. He noted that for a war with neighboring states, it would be more logical to keep troops closer to the border. Kento thought about it and agreed that there was no point in calling up more than 200 people to an area far from the actual battlefields. Reinhardt suggested that the third princess might be plotting to usurp the throne using her powers. Kento, surprised, concluded that this was a coup d'etat. He noted that the princess truly looked like someone obsessed with power. This made him realize that they might be caught in a fight for the throne. Reinhard confirmed that the likelihood of this scenario is very high. Kento reluctantly agreed with his assumption. Suddenly, Reinhard noticed a cart ahead. Kento assumed that the carriage was attacked by monsters. Reinhard confirmed, explaining that the cargo had been abandoned and that clothing might be found among the items. He added that if the cart was left lying there, its contents would begin to decompose, so it would be wise to make use of the cargo. Kento agreed, noting that his current attire might arouse suspicion. While examining the items in the cart, he noticed that the clothes were women's and too big for him. He regretfully thought that he could have used them if they had been the right size. Suddenly, he came across something strange. Reinhard explained that it was a slave's bracelet and assumed that the cart was carrying several slaves. Kento asked in surprise what exactly Reinhard had said. The commander clarified that Mr. Kento was apparently not familiar with the concept of slave bracelets. Kento remarked that he'd seen something similar to this bracelet before and expressed doubt, suspecting it was a device to suppress magical powers. Reinhard explained that it was a magical device used to restrain criminals and slaves. Kento's mind was filled with anger when he realized the princess had forced them to wear those bracelets immediately after the magic had been detected. He cursed her in his heart. Reinhardt remarked that it seemed they'd all been tricked. Kento agreed, surprised by what had happened. He admitted he'd like to help the others if he could, but doubted he could. Reinhard tried to console him, understanding Kento's distress, and advised him not to be too pessimistic. Kento, however, pointed out that even as they spoke, his classmates were being held as slaves. Reinhard reassured Kento, saying that the princess had summoned them for a specific purpose, and until that purpose was achieved, there was no reason to worry about anyone being harmed. Kento considered this and agreed that it was unlikely they would dispose of people they had just summoned. But then he remembered that perhaps they had treated him differently after all, and he wondered if they had gotten rid of him. Reinhard, albeit reluctantly, suggested that Kento might have been sent to this place only because he was considered a failure. Kento took this with sadness, concluding that all the other classmates had been useful, while he had been deemed useless. He even joked that sweat started pouring out of his eyes, hinting at tears. Reinhard, trying to support his master, confidently stated that in the entire kingdom, and perhaps even on the entire continent, there was no magician who could compare to Kento. Kento was surprised and, deciding to prove his strength, declared that he would remove the bracelets from the hands of his classmates. He easily destroyed the bracelet, much to the amazement of his subordinates. Baston expressed surprise, not believing what had happened. Kento, hearing his reaction, asked what had happened. Baston explained that the slave collar's lock couldn't be easily unlocked, and noted that if Kento was able to remove it so easily, it could only mean one thing: he was using darkness magic. Baston also added that Kento possessed light magic, saying he'd heard that such mages could conceal themselves in their own shadows and use them to summon monsters from a distance. Kento was surprised to learn that this could be done with dark magic and immediately asked if he could take the money and supplies they found in the wagon with him. He also inquired how this would be accomplished. Reinhardt suggested using magic in the same way that Kento had already intuitively used it. After Kento changed his clothes, he agreed to try, noting that he wouldn't know his capabilities until he tried. Kento thought about what he was capable of and came to the conclusion that his abilities were truly extraordinary. He realized that he could summon his skeletons from the shadows and move them through it. Moreover, he discovered that he himself could hide in the shadows and move through them, which he thought was surprisingly cool. Kento, delighted, compared his magic to a 4D container. Reinhardt, not understanding, asked again what 4D was. Kento thought about his new capabilities, realizing that he could now store luggage in the shadow space. As he and his squad moved towards Walzard, his skeletons continued to grow stronger, even becoming too powerful. 4 days had passed since they began crossing the demon forest. When Kento saw Walzard, he wondered if it was possible to get inside using shadows. Reinhardt warned him, noting that the lack of official permission could lead to serious problems in the future. Kento agreed, deciding to enter the city through the front door to avoid suspicion. He emphasized that after leaving the demon forest, he should look as if he were on the verge of exhaustion. As they approached the gate, the soldier noticed Kento and, concerned about his condition, rushed to help. Kento theatrically asked for help, feigning weakness. The soldier reassured him, praising him for his efforts and assuring him that everything would be fine now. Kento, feeling a slight sense of guilt for deceiving him, noted that his plan to infiltrate the city had worked. Waking up later, Kento looked around the place he found himself in with surprise. The soldier, seeing that Kento had come to his senses, noted that he looked much better than yesterday, when he looked like a dead man. Kento asked where he was. The soldier asked Kento if he had fully regained consciousness and explained that he was in the garrison quarters of the fortified city of Walzard. He added that the main thing is that Kento survived. Kento thanked him for his concern. In his thoughts, he noted that the new life was so different from the old one that he became exhausted and fell into a deep sleep. The soldier expressed sympathy, mentioning that Kento had probably lost friends but assured him that it was not his fault and he should not blame himself. Kento thanked again for the support. The soldier introduced himself as Kurtz, a third-rank captain of the garrison of the city of Walzard. Kento also gave his name and said that he was glad to meet you. Kurtz asked what Kento was doing. Kento, after a slight hesitation, replied that he had joined a caravan of Western traders as an apprentice healer. In his thoughts, he praised himself for having thought out the story in advance with Reinhardt and the others. Kurtz expressed respect for Kento, emphasizing that being a healer's apprentice at such a young age was impressive. Kento modestly explained that he was only an assistant doing work for his teacher and had never treated anyone before. In his mind, he remembered that he had actually already healed even his own serious wounds, including those left after the goblin attack. Kento noted that he needed to obtain an ID card to be able to work and earn money. Kurtz offered to escort him to the guild. He clarified that if Kento was feeling well, they could go there right away. Kento agreed and thanked him for his help. Kento was amazed by what he saw in the city. He noticed that the inhabitants had light blue, green, or pink hair, and some looked like animals. He thought the city was very spacious. Kurtz confirmed his observations, pointing out that the visible wall was the wall of the old city, and that to reach the end of the new city one would have to go 3 times further. Kento let out a surprised exclamation, noticing that something was much larger than he expected. He asked if the roads were maintained in such a state by magic. Kurtz explained that without magic it wouldn't be so clean. He then pointed to a building with a crossed sword and hammer symbol, noting that it was the guild building. Kento suggested that the sign symbolized hard work associated with adventure and crafts. Kurtz confirmed his guess, adding that there were also easy tasks in the guild. Upon entering the building, Kento announced his desire to register. The old man in charge of the process invited him to place his hand on a magic ball. Kento noticed the instrument and was surprised. The old man explained that the ball was designed to determine magical power and abilities. Kento mentally expressed his dislike for the tool, but agreed to undergo the test. He assumed that the results might have changed since he had already used magic in the demon forest. Placing his hand on the ball, he heard the old man remark on the rarity of such a result, but awarded it an F rank. Kento asked what F rank meant, to which the old man explained that it was the lowest rank at which one could not use magic, and if one entered the demon forest, one would die immediately. Kento understood and responded. The old man continued, clarifying that regardless of the strength of one's magic, without achievements, one will not rise above rank E. Kurtz noted that Kento was incredibly lucky to have survived the demon forest. The old man asked in amazement if Kento had actually returned from there alive. Kento hesitantly confirmed it. The old man expressed surprise that, despite not possessing magic, Kento was still able to survive. Kento mentally noted that his secret was the 3 powerful skeletons under his control. The conversation was interrupted by a girl with cat ears who turned to Kento, noticing that he was new. Kento noticed her unusual ears, but this irritated the boy, who rudely asked why Kento was looking at her like that. Kento apologized for his behavior. The girl, ignoring her brother, introduced herself as Mule and apologized for his rudeness. She asked his name. Kento stated his name. Mule noted that he had unusual black hair and asked where he was from. He said that he was in a trading caravan from the west that was attacked by monsters in the demon forest. Mule anxiously asked if he was okay. Kento replied that he was fine, but the others were not so lucky. Mule suddenly hugged Kento, calling him poor thing and encouraging him. Kento felt like he couldn't breathe and noticed that he was suffocating. Mule laughed, saying he was probably ticklish. Her brother Jillik became angry and accused Kento of hugging his sister for too long. Jillik grabbed Kento by the collar, clearly irritated by the situation. Kento noted with relief that he thought he was going to die. Mule tried to calm her brother down by asking him not to be so rude. Jillik reacted by pointing out that it was she who almost strangled Kento. Mule was surprised to hear the news that Kento had achieved F rank. She recommended that he take on the harvesting quest at the Liber farm, believing it would be the perfect assignment for him. Jillik agreed with Mule's opinion, adding that it would be a very suitable task for a boy of his rank. Kurtz also supported the idea, noting that it would be his first assignment, and suggested that Kento not pass up the opportunity. Kento, after listening to their advice, decided that he could really try his hand at this job. Kurtz, satisfied with his decision, said that everything was now decided. Kurtz then suggested that they consider whether there might be a suitable place for Kento to stay. The old man, upon hearing the proposal, suggested that Kento stay with Amanda if it suited him, and asked if Kento had any money. While Kento was considering the offer, his mind was occupied by the fact that all the money he found in the demon forest was in the shadow vault, and it would be strange if he suddenly took it out. He was lent 10,000 helts interest-free, but he didn't know its true value. He hoped it would at least cover rent. When Kento arrived at Amanda's house, she greeted him but apologized, informing him that the establishment was closed for the day and suggesting that he return the next day. Kento, having explained that he had been sent here by the guild, tried to clarify, but Amanda still understood and asked if there was anyone from the garrison with him. Kurtz replied that he was merely an escort and that only Kento needed the room. Amanda expressed delight at meeting them, saying it was a pleasure to meet them. Kurtz, talking about Kento, said that he miraculously survived the attack of monsters on his caravan in the demon forest. Amanda, feeling compassion, hugged Kento and expressed her concern for his ordeal. Kento, feeling awkward, declared that he couldn't breathe and sighed, feeling the lack of air. Amanda apologized and asked him if he had any money and what he was doing at the moment. Kento explained that he borrowed money from the guild, but he didn't have the skills to work in any specialty. Amanda, hearing his answer, noted that there wasn't much time left until the end of the month, so rent wouldn't be charged until next month. She added that the monthly rent was 2,500 helta, or 3,000 helta with breakfast and dinner. Kento thanked Amanda and agreed to take the room with food. Amanda confirmed and said that the rent would have to be paid at the end of each month. Kurtz, preparing to leave, told Kento that if he needed help, he knew where to find him. Kento thanked Kurtz for everything he had done for him. Kurtz replied that it was his job and advised him not to overdo it in his new endeavor. Kento promised to let Kurtz know once he was fully settled. The girl standing nearby asked who this guy was. Amanda explained that his name was Kento and that he would be living here starting today. She invited Mesa to greet him. Mesa, however, noted in bewilderment that perhaps Kento would die soon anyway. Amanda chided Mesa, saying that she shouldn't say that. Kento, surprised, asked what happened to those who lived here before him. Amanda replied that he would soon find out everything himself, but added that the one who lived here before, after settling in, immediately went to the dungeon. Kento, realizing that they were talking about a dungeon, asked what it meant. Amanda confirmed that it was a dungeon, but warned that it wasn't worth going there because it wasn't worth it. Kento agreed and understood the warning. Amanda, after making sure Kento understood, asked Mesa to show him his room. Mesa nodded wordlessly and motioned for Kento to follow her. As they walked, Kento couldn't help but ask about the dungeon, asking if it was really that dangerous there. Mesa replied that if he really wanted to die, he could go there without hesitation, but added that it wasn't worth it. She showed him his room, telling him it was entirely his to use from now on, and said goodbye. Kento thanked her. He looked around the room and noticed that there were only the most necessary things for living. He realized that this was how it should be, but suddenly he noticed something strange. Mesa returned, hearing his surprise, and asked what he was doing. Kento froze, startled. Later, having recovered from his first impressions, Kento sighed and admitted that too much had happened and he was now confused. Reinhard, after listening to him, also expressed confusion, saying that they were not actually in the kingdom of Riesenberg, but in the Republic of Landshelf. He said that while they were wandering among the dead, the country was divided into two parts, and if they were now in another country, then it was quite possible that the princess's goal was not to usurp the throne. Kento, a little surprised, asked if this meant the princess might attack Walzard. Reinhard confirmed that this was entirely possible, as this had once been their own country. Kento asked Bastian and Fred what they thought of the city. Fred added that Walzard had become more prosperous than it had been in their lifetime. Bastian, agreeing, noted that the city had grown larger and there were more people in it. Reinhard also emphasized that this Walzard was much better than what they knew in life. Kento, thinking, asked if this meant that whoever was currently running the city had good policies. Reinhard agreed, noting that perhaps it was because the city had become more open and now had a lot of ordinary people living there, not just adventurers. Kento wondered if the evil princess would succeed in invading this city. Kento's mind was filled with worry. He'd only just arrived here and he'd already met so many kind people. He began to wonder if war really did break out, he'd have to fight against his classmates. Bastian, noticing his anxiety, tried to calm him down, saying that everything would not happen so quickly. Kento, hearing this, asked doubtfully if this was really so. Bastian explained that despite their talents in magic, their preparation for battle would take at least 2 years. Kento, hearing this, made a decision and ordered Fred to go on reconnaissance to the kingdom of Riesenberg. Fred confidently replied that he could handle it easily, because he knew how to hide in the shadows. Kento then instructed Bastian to investigate the situation and Walzard and Reinhard to remain with him as his escort. Both Bastian and Reinhard agreed with the orders. Kento decided that he would investigate the situation himself while he continued to work here. On the morning of the third day from the start of work, Reinhard woke Kento up, saying it was time to get up. Kento's thoughts returned to his tasks. Harvesting the crops at the Liber farm seemed easy, but the work was not so easy at all. He felt tired and had muscle pain, but he was glad that he could heal himself and not experience excruciating pain. Kento greeted Dino in the morning, telling him good morning. Dino, seeing him, congratulated Kento with a good look, noting that he had helped a lot with the harvest. Kento, a little proudly, replied that he had already become skilled in this matter and that they could rely on him. Dino, smiling, admitted that it was nice to hear, but soon his face changed from pain and he complained that he was in a lot of pain. Kento became concerned about Dino's condition and asked if he was okay. Dino, trying to calm Kento down, said that he was fine and that there was no need to worry. However, Kento offered to examine him as he was a healer's apprentice, and if Dino didn't mind, he could help. Dino still insisted that everything was fine and that Kento was probably tired himself, so there was no point in wasting time on him. But Kento didn't give up and asked if there was any pain in a certain place, to which Dino confirmed that yes, there was pain. Kento used his healing magic and Dino felt relieved. Dino expressed surprise at how well he felt and noted that his back pain was now completely gone. Kento, happy about the successful treatment, said that everything would be fine, there was just a little bit left. Dino was surprised by the result and was completely free from pain. Kento felt proud of his success, as this was his first successful treatment of another person. Reinhardt remarked that this was to be expected from Kento, praising him for his excellent skill. Kento replied modestly that his success did not seem like anything special to him. Reinhardt continued that Kento could very well become the country's greatest healer, despite his modesty. Kento noted that despite his success, he still has other concerns that keep him busy. Reinhardt reminded that saving his friends was the top priority. Kento thought he'd been gone for a week before he knew it. He thought he'd been asked to stay another week with the promise of more pay each day. Dino announced that they were paying him 600 helts a day, and Kento confidently replied that they could rely on him. While in Japan, he was often scolded for his mistakes, and his relationship with his parents wasn't the best. He began to wonder whether he should return home at all. At that moment, Fred approached Kento and addressed him. Kento, looking up, asked if Fred had found out where his classmates were. Fred informed Kento that he had found the location of those they were looking for and that they were not far from the summoning site. Kento immediately inquired about their treatment, to which Fred replied that it wasn't exactly bad but not great either. Some, especially the Holy Lady, were held in high esteem. Kento, realizing that they were talking about the village headman, asked about him. Fred explained that people with light magic are rare and those with strong enough magic are very few. Kento, having learned that the princess did not yet have a clear goal, approached Baston with a question about the ruler of Walzard. Baston noted that the man was quite an interesting personality. He told the story of Klaus Walzard, who was about 50 years old. He explained that Klaus had become the city's ruler after the death of his brother, who was supposed to take over. Klaus had previously been an adventurer, so he knew the city's ins and outs well. He didn't allow anyone to engage in shady dealings and brought significant changes to the city. It was these changes that made him a popular favorite. Baston noted that Klaus imposed limits on loan shark interest rates and restricted gambling operations. He also helped the sick and poor, providing them with support. Kento expressed admiration, saying that he seemed like a good person. But Baston noted that one should be careful because he has a feeling that Klaus may not be what he seems. Kento agreed cautiously. At this time, he met Kurtz, who was surprised to see Kento, and noted that he had tanned a little. Kento explained that he had been working on the farm, and Kurtz, happy for him, noted that the main thing was that he was okay. Kurtz's acquaintance approached Kento and, upon hearing his name, said he had heard a lot about him from Kurtz. He introduced himself as Bart and expressed his pleasure at meeting him. Kento reciprocated the feelings and added that he had thought of a way to thank him by offering to treat Bar. Kurtz declined the thanks, saying it was his job, but offered Kento the chance to become a new customer at his favorite restaurant. Kurtz pointed in the direction, saying that they needed to go this way. Kento apologized for disturbing him. Bart replied that it was no problem and added that Kento even helped since he and the captain were a little awkward going there. The girl greeted them. Kurtz turned to her, saying hello and clarifying that there were 3 of them today, asking if there was room. Marin replied that of course there was room and suggested sitting at a far table. Kurtz thanked her, to which Marin replied that she was grateful. Kento thought that Kurtz was acting like a teenager, and that was easy to understand. Marin, noticing Kento, asked who he was, and Kurtz told her about him. He explained that Kento had joined a trading caravan that was attacked by monsters in the Demon Forest, and that he was the only survivor. Marin, hearing this, expressed sympathy, saying that Kento must have been through a lot. She couldn't help but hug Kento close, which made him think that she really was soft. Kurtz exclaimed Kento's name in irritation. Kento in turn thought that he should apologize. An unfamiliar voice repeated Kokubu's name, gradually becoming louder and more insistent. Kento woke up with a start, looking around in fear and not understanding what was happening. The teacher turned to Kento and reproachfully noted that he had fallen asleep again during the lesson, which was interfering with his studies. Funyami expressed his disdain, noting that Kento was unable to study even when he was in good health, and called him a loser. Takayama added that Kento was weak not only in his studies but also in sports, after which he insultingly called him useless. Hashimoto continued the conversation by stating that there were people who were nothing special, calling them untalented, and suggested that the teacher ignore Kento. Takayama picked up on this thought, noting that even the teacher didn't care about someone like Kento and urged them to continue the lesson. Amidst all this, Yuko's quiet voice rang out, sadly saying Kento's name. His classmates began to laugh at him one after another, loudly and mockingly. Kento woke up feeling anxious and tense. Reinhard, concerned about Kento's condition, asked if something was wrong. Kento tried to hide his emotions, briefly replying that nothing happened. In his mind, he reflected on how the place he came from had become a source of nightmares for him, but now he was happy because he could be of use to others. Then he turned his attention to pressing matters and wondered what task he should choose next. He noticed Mule and, turning to her, began to speak. Mule looked at Kento in surprise, recognizing him as a familiar guy. Kento introduced himself, adding that he had been advised to go to the Liber farm. Mule noted that within 2 weeks he began to look stronger. Jillik intervened, stating that Kento was still as weak as ever. Mule tried to reason with him, asking him not to be so angry. Jillik asked mockingly if Kento even knew how to handle a weapon. Kento hesitated, the thought crossing his mind that he had never actually held a sword in his hands. The old man suggested that Kento sign up for the combat training that would be held today. Kento became interested, asking if such classes were really held here. Jillik again sarcastically noted that even signing up for classes would not change anything. Mule sternly demanded that Jillik stop his barbs. Kento was adamant that he wanted to enroll. Reinhard worriedly suggested that Kento train with him if he needed combat training. Kento refused, explaining that his body simply couldn't handle training with Reinhard. In his mind, Kento noted that the setting reminded him of a school classroom. The boy turned to Kento, asking if he was a F rank. He introduced himself as Manon and asked his name. Kento replied that his name was Kento and confirmed that he was also an F rank, suggesting that Manon was also an F rank. Manon agreed and expressed delight at meeting him. Kento, in turn, noted that Manon had light blue hair and a dazzling aura. The man began to count, checking if everyone was present, and having made sure that everyone was there, he said that classes could begin. He introduced himself as Donovan and suggested that they call him by that name. Kento thought Donovan looked like a scary guy. Donovan began with an important reminder that no one should forget. He explained that owning a gun doesn't make a person strong, strength comes only from mastering that weapon. Even if a sword possesses the power to cut down a victim with a single swing, it will be useless if a person lacks the strength to lift it. Donovan asked how a person could become stronger if the weapon was in their hands without the ability to use it. He emphasized that one should only take up weapons that one can learn to use, gain experience with, and become a master of. Only then can one become truly strong, he assured, and asked if the audience had understood this. After his impassioned speech, Donovan continued the training, explaining the characteristics of various weapons. Despite his intimidating expression, his explanations were detailed and clear. However, it turned out he wasn't very good at drawing, which would have helped visualize the information. He then went on to talk about the monsters, explaining their dangers, weaknesses, what materials could be obtained from them, and what could be sold. He shared his knowledge based on personal experience, which gave his words credibility. After lunch, they had to swing their swords for a long time, which greatly tired all the participants. At the end of the training, Donovan signed Kento up for classes the following Wednesday and strictly instructed him to be sure to show up. Kento agreed, but the other participants declined, citing plans for the following week. Even Manon wished Kento good luck and also decided not to attend. Kento felt confused and perplexed when everyone refused to continue training, even Manon leaving him alone. He thought Donovan had been too strict, and that seemed to be the reason no one wanted to continue. On the street, Kento was approached by strangers who asked him for money and inquired about the contents of his bag. He tried to defend himself, asking questions about who they were and why he needed the money since he didn't have any. At that moment, he thought he was unlucky enough to find himself in such a situation. When they asked him for money again, he gathered his courage and asked a counter question about what would happen if he refused. The men, threatening Kento, asked if he was sure he wanted to know what would happen if he refused, and warned that he might not be able to walk for a while. Kento asked with a smile if they had heard of the monsters that sometimes appeared in these parts. The men responded with bewilderment that there could be no monsters within the castle walls, but one of them mentioned rumors of skeletons appearing in the dark. At that moment, Reinhard appeared behind Kento, looking impressive. The men ran away in panic, shouting that it was a monster and a skeleton. Kento thanked Reinhard for his help, believing that it was enough. Reinhard suggested scaring the men even more so that they would experience real horror. Kento explained that in that case they might guess about his abilities as a dark mage and it would be better to avoid that. Reinhard respectfully agreed with Kento's decision, submitting to his will. Later, at Amanda's house, Kento complained that he was very tired. Reinhard praised him, noting that he had done a good job. Kento was surprised, not understanding what exactly he had done. Reinhard explained that Kento, despite being surrounded by two people, was not afraid and remained calm. Kento modestly noted that those men weren't serious, so there was no reason to be afraid. Reinhardt replied that the worst thing on the battlefield was losing one's composure, while Kento displayed incredible calm. He reminded them that losing control could lead to serious mistakes and dire consequences. Kento admitted that this was true, but added that he was not yet sure whether he could act correctly in such a situation. Mesa called out to Kento, telling him that dinner was ready and asking who he was talking to. Kento replied that he was talking to himself, thanked her for the invitation, and promised to come over soon. Suddenly, Mesa hit him in the stomach. He became indignant and asked what she was doing. Mesa noticed that he was getting stronger, but he still had a lot of work to do. Kento was confused by what had come over her. She warned him that if he went into the dungeon, he would die, adding that the previous guy who had been stronger than him had never returned. Kento was quick to assure that he had no intention of going there. Mesa expressed doubt, pointing out that Kento was being too suspicious. Kento tried to convince her that he wasn't suspicious at all, and upon seeing the food, he remarked that it looked delicious, wishing himself bon appetit. Mesa, turning to her mother, asked her not to let Kento go into the dungeon. Kento repeated that he had no intention of going there, while enjoying his food. Amanda sternly reminded them that there would be no dungeon crawls. Kento agreed, admitting that it was beyond his power. She asked if he was planning to go to the demon forest. Kento was quick to reassure her that he wasn't going there, apologizing for making them worry. Amanda expressed relief upon hearing this. However, in his mind, Kento admitted that it was difficult for him to train with a sword near where he lived, so he used shadow magic to teleport to the demon forest. Kento was surprised and asked why there was so much space. Reinhardt, with a cheerful laugh, replied that it was a training ground specially prepared for him, and then asked how he liked it. Kento, looking around the area, realized that the place was indeed very large and compared it in size to a baseball field. Reinhardt suggested starting with swings and pointed out that Kento wasn't swinging his sword hard enough, urging him to be more forceful and aggressive. Kento reflected on how his training was reaching the point of madness. He tried his best. After swinging, he'd practice hitting the log and then he'd have to run. During these training sessions, he'd repeatedly injured his body, but he'd restore it with magic. After morning classes, he carried out tasks for the guild, working in Garm's potato warehouse, and at night he had special training with Reinhard. He noted that he sleeps only about 3 hours a day, but thanks to proper nutrition and the magic of recovery, he manages to cope with this workload. In the morning, Kento greeted Jillik. Jillik responded rudely, recognizing him. Kento asked where Mule was. Jillik said with irritation that his sister was in combat magic classes. Kento was surprised to learn that such classes were held here. Jillik, as usual, raised his voice, answering that of course such classes are held. Kento noted sarcastically to himself that Jillik seemed unable to speak without shouting. Jillik declared that he had no time for Kento and hurried to his sister. Kento, while thinking, became interested in the combat magic training and decided to take a look at it too. Jillik asked irritably why Kento was following him. Kento replied that he was just curious. During his lessons, Mule concentrated, chanting a spell that merged his mana with that of the surrounding world. With each word, his power grew and he channeled it into his hands as if gathering invisible energy. The magic began to take shape, and soon it became the tip of a wind blade ready for action. Jillik, watching his sister, praised her and suggested that at this rate she would soon move on to the next level. Kento mentally turned to Reinhard, asking if it was really necessary to chant for a long time to use magic. Reinhard explained that the more powerful the spell, the longer the incantation should be. Kento expressed doubt, noting that if casting the spell took that long, the monsters could easily kill the mage in the process. Reinhard explained that mages typically practice casting spells to reduce casting time or work in tandem with melee fighters for defense. He noted that using magic without spells like Kento is a unique and rare phenomenon. Kento responded with surprise, realizing how unusual this was. Donovan, noticing Jillik, asked loudly what they were both doing there. Then he added mockingly that it was he again, Jillik, who had come to spy. Jillik, shyly correcting himself, hastened to object that this was not so and that he was not peeping at all. Donovan turned his gaze to Kento, asking the same question, suspecting that they had come together. Kento admitted that they came to watch the mages' combat training. Donovan suspected that Kento wanted to know how to counter the mages and clarified this. Kento tried to explain, confused, that his goal was completely different. Donovan, ignoring the excuses, offered advice on how to defeat a mage: strike before the spell is finished. If the mage manages to complete the incantation, anticipate the attack's direction and dodge. Kento mentally noted that Donovan solved everything solely with brute force. Donovan looked around, noticed that Jillik had arrived on time, and suggested that he practice with Kento. Jillik was indignant, saying that he did not understand why he should help Kento. Donovan asked sternly if Jillik had any complaints, displaying his usual pressure. Jillik, realizing Donovan's stern tone, quickly backed down, claiming he hadn't meant anything bad. Kento chuckled to himself as he noticed that Jillik was clearly afraid of Donovan. Jillik, noticing Kento's smile, rudely asked what he was happy about. Kento denied it, saying that he simply came to watch the mages' combat training. Donovan reminded Kento that he had only miraculously survived the demon forest and added that more training was needed to prevent such incidents. Kento hesitated, realizing that there was no way to avoid this. Kento noted in his thoughts that the situation reminded him of something like a kendo club. He felt a little embarrassed, thinking that the atmosphere was a little different from what he expected. Regretfully, he thought that if he had known where everything would lead, he certainly would not have followed Jillik. Donovan ordered Jillik to only target the parts of Kento's body that were protected by armor, while Kent gave Jillik permission to attack anywhere. Jillik defiantly declared that he had no intention of giving in to the little bastard. Kento agreed to start, and Jillik reluctantly confirmed his readiness. The watching men discussed the situation, amazed that the young man had survived and returned from the demonic forest. They said things would be tough for Jillik now, especially if the boy actually knew how to wield a sword. Kento felt the pressure of the conversations, but he concentrated. Jillik demanded that Kento attack first. Kento, remembering his night training with Reinhard, decided to show off his results. He calmly watched Jillik's movements, waiting for him to open up. When the moment came, Kento launched an attack, confident that he would succeed. Jillik suddenly took the initiative and punched Kento in the face. Kento was at a loss as to how this had happened. The watching men became alarmed and demanded that Kent be taken immediately to the infirmary. In his mind, Kento repeated that he had not expected such an outcome. Kento felt something soft and was surprised to find his fingers sinking into it. He thought it couldn't be real. Then he opened his eyes and saw Mule in front of him, and was even more surprised. Mule chuckled and said that Kento was a guy after all. Kento was startled and immediately apologized, asking for forgiveness sincerely. She reassured him, telling him not to worry. He wondered why he ended up in bed with Mule and thought that perhaps it had something to do with growing up unconsciously. Mule explained that she had come to check on him because he had passed out on the training ground and then accidentally fallen asleep. She apologized for disturbing him. Kento remembered Jillik. Mule noted that if the enemy was Jillik, then there was no chance. He said with disappointment that he had undergone special training, but it was not enough. Mule advised him not to overdo it and offered him something to eat so that he wouldn't feel hungry, as an apology for what happened. Kento was surprised to notice that it all happened during training, and now Mule was treating him. Mule asked him not to embarrass his sister and just agree and eat. At that moment, a man came up and asked if he was awake, noticing that Kento had been hit hard but seemed to be okay. Kento, puzzled, wondered who it was and replied that he seemed to have recovered, and also asked how long he had been sleeping. The man laughed, praised him, and said he should rest and eat a little, then continue building up his strength. He offered to let the chef buy him a meal at his expense. Kento insisted it wasn't worth it since they didn't even know each other. Mule noted that the man had plenty of money, so there was no need to worry. He was surprised when he asked what she meant by full of money. He wondered if the man would be angry at such words and began to suspect it might be Mule's father. Mule reminded him that he was new here and didn't know this man. The man grinned and introduced himself, saying that his city was Valzard and invited Kento to his city. Kento said in confusion that this was his city, not understanding how this was possible. The man introduced himself as Klaus Walzard and added that it was a pleasure to meet him. Mule confirmed that he was indeed the ruler of Walzard. Kento responded that the feeling was mutual, although he was still a little shocked. He thought he only knew about him from Baston's report, but now, meeting him, he realized that Klaus seemed very friendly. Klaus asked if Kento had survived the demon forest, adding that he was happy to welcome lucky guys like him. Kento modestly said he was simply lucky since he was a worthless man whom even the magic ball didn't recognize. Klaus slammed his fist on the table and called Kento a fool. He offered Kento some advice, saying that in this world nothing can fail if a person truly tries. He added that no one is incapable of achieving success, they just need to understand how to develop properly. Klaus explained that people at the top need to help those who are still searching for their path to unlock their potential. He noted that Kento had no talent for magic, but he had other abilities, and to understand what exactly he was good at, he had a long way to go, made many mistakes, and learned a lot. Klaus assured Kento that only by following this path would he truly unlock his potential and shine. He said Kento would definitely find something he was good at, and that would lead him to success. Kento, touched by these words, burst into tears, confirming that he understood the instruction. He never thought anyone would acknowledge his existence like this. At school, he'd always been considered talentless, and so now he couldn't hold back his tears. Klaus believed in him even though he knew he had failed the test with the magic ball, unlike the princess, who simply decided to get rid of him without getting her hands dirty. Kento was determined to rescue his classmates and take them to Walzard. The next morning, Kento told Fred he was going to move and asked him to be on guard. Fred replied that he understood. They came to the city of Lastok. Reinhard called Kento over to him, showing him the way. Kento, assessing the situation, expressed surprise at the ease of the travel method, noting that using Fred as a landmark allowed him to travel instantly. He admitted that this felt like sheer cheating. Looking around, Kento noticed that the atmosphere in this city was much calmer compared to Walzard. Reinhard explained that this city was built 15 years ago. Kento asked Reinhard where everyone else was, to which he replied that they were outside the city. Kento, thinking, noticed that the city was surrounded by strong walls, but he could easily penetrate inside using the shadow. At this point, Funyami cast a spell, pronouncing the words clearly and confidently. He addressed the mana that ruled this world, asking it to gather in his hands. He then ordered her to envelop the ball he had created and imbue it with strengthening properties. Kento noticed that Funyami had become a little thinner. Reinhard explained that those who fail receive less food. One of the soldiers, after carefully examining the result of Funyami's spell, frowned and reproachfully remarked that the material hadn't hardened at all. He expressed dissatisfaction, emphasizing that in such a state, the vanguard could easily become prey for monsters. Kento inquired about the purpose of the clay balls. Reinhard explained that, thanks to physical enhancement, knights possess strength far exceeding that of ordinary humans. He noted that even a simple throw of a stone by a knight could kill a person. Kento noticed that the balls were indeed suitable for making them easier to throw. The soldier grabbed Funyami by the collar and demanded that he admit that he could not learn no matter how hard he tried, threatening to choose between obedience and death. Funyami surrendered and said he chose obedience. The soldier demanded that he say it louder, repeating his question about what he should choose. Funyami confirmed that he would obey and do his best. Reinhard noted that this was how Kento's friends were treated. Takayama cast a spell calling upon the magical power of mana. He called upon it to gather in his hands, transforming into fire. Finishing his words, he cast the spell, transforming the energy into a fireball that glowed before him, ready for use. Takayama successfully performed the spell, and the soldiers expressed their admiration, praising him for his excellent performance. The maid, turning to Takayama with admiration, noted that he was, as always, inimitable. Takayama thanked her with a slight smile, calling it a mere trifle for himself. Kento, surprised, asked Reinhardt about the nickname Mr. Hero. Reinhardt explained that Takayama received the title due to his superior magical power. After this, Kento noticed the girl next to the hero and asked who she was. Reinhardt calmly replied that she was his personal maid, who not only cared for and fed the hero, but also shared his bed. Kento, surprised, thought about this and felt a little envious. Shelia asked if Takayama would continue training. Takayama replied that he needed to become even stronger to avoid unnecessary casualties. Kento, not hiding his disgust, said that such words made him sick. Reinhardt, noticing Kento's reaction, informed him that Lady Saint was in the infirmary. Kento suggested that they go there immediately, and they headed to the infirmary. In the infirmary, Yuko cast a spell focusing the magical power of mana. She called upon it to gather in her hands, directing the flow toward healing. She then asked how the patient felt after her treatment. The old man thanked Yuko for her help, noting that she had done a very good job. Yuko breathed a sigh of relief, but the maid advised her to rest a bit. Yuko replied that she could still continue working. The maid insisted on a break, reminding them that there were still many people who needed help, and suggested taking a break. Yuko agreed. Baston noted that their master was far superior to her as a healer, and Reinhardt added that Kento didn't cast spells or cast incantations. His abilities allowed him to heal instantly, without further ado. Kento modestly replied that he didn't want to compare himself to her. At this point, the woman panicked and asked for help for her son. One of the soldiers tried to stop her, saying that Yuko shouldn't be pressured. She had her limits, too. However, the woman insisted, explaining that her son had a high temperature for 3 days and asked that Yuko's request be conveyed. Yuko, without wasting any time, offered to examine the boy and said that now was not the time to rest. The woman thanked her for her help, and Yuko began examining him, noticing that the boy was hot. She used healing magic. Reinhardt reported that Yuko had already used her magic 3 times, but the boy had not gotten any better. Kento noted that the headman's condition had even worsened, to which Reinhardt agreed that the situation didn't look very good. Kento, deciding to help, stated that he would intervene using his shadow and that no one would be able to see him do it. Yuko noticed that the boy had improved, his breathing had stabilized, and his fever had subsided. The woman expressed gratitude, thanking her for her help. The soldier also praised Yuko, saying that this was to be expected from a saintly lady. Yuko said she was happy to help, but the maid noticed she was tired and asked what was wrong. Yuko apologized, noting that if she were better at healing, she could cure many more people. The maid tried to console Yuko, reminding her that she had already done so much for people, treating them every day as if they were her own family. She advised her not to tear herself apart. Yuko thanked her and promised to try. The maid confidently added that she believed in her and that she truly deserved to be called a saint. Kento noted that Yuko was having a hard time as she was completely exhausted. Reinhardt confirmed his words, adding that the saint had already healed many people since that morning. Kento, seeing her worries, praised the headman, promising that after his treatment she would get better. Yuko suddenly stood up, her face full of confusion. The maid, noticing this, asked what had happened, turning to Yuko with concern. Yuko, in turn, asked how long she had been sleeping. The maid replied that she had just gone to bed. Yuko was surprised to feel light, as if all the fatigue had left her body. The maid suggested that it might be due to the daily practice of magic, and noted that her level had risen. She explained that magical power could increase unexpectedly, a phenomenon called leveling up. Yuko wondered if perhaps her treatment of the boy really was different from other cases. Reinhardt noted that Kento might have been a bit overzealous. He explained that Yuko has a strong sense of responsibility, and when she can't cure what she thinks she should, she can begin to feel inadequate. Kento asked, doubting that light mages didn't have the ability to heal themselves with their magic. Reinhardt replied that such a quick recovery was something only Kento could do, and that other people could never even dream of it. He warned him that if he did not check the situation periodically, it could get worse. Kento, hearing this, replied with a smile that thanks to his shadow transference, he could quickly get to any place, so he had nothing to worry about. He added with a laugh that everything would be fine. Camellia heard a knock on the door and asked who was there. Shelia replied that it was him. Camellia asked how things were going with the boring hero and asked if Shelia had done what was required. Shelia confirmed that she had done everything. Camellia reminded her that she had a specific task to accomplish. Shelia confirmed that her goal was to become pregnant with the hero's child and give birth to it. Camellia said that even though Shelia was only half royal, she still had to fulfill her duty. She added that if everything was clear, Shelia could go. Shelia replied that she understood and asked permission to leave. Kento asked Fred to check on the maid. Kento instructed Fred to check on the maid. Fred confirmed that he would complete the task. Kento asked where Camellia was. Fred informed him that Camellia had gone to the bathroom. Kento returned to Lastok for reconnaissance 2 days after his first visit. He thought about Camellia, noting that few royal women trained so hard, as most were used to winning men's hearts with their looks and education. This made him think that Camellia might be a heretic among heretics. Reinhard, in response to Kento's remark, added that Camellia was probably an extremely willful princess. Kento joked, asking if she enjoyed subduing men by force, to which Reinhard laughed, noting that if that were the case, she would have used the young butler. After that, Kento concluded that she ultimately revealed nothing. Reinhardt suggested that Camellia was likely the only person in Lastok with knowledge of summoning magic. Kento agreed with Reinhardt's opinion. Reinhardt said they could return to the old world either by figuring it out themselves or by getting Camellia to tell them. He clarified that before they could negotiate with Camellia, they would need to rescue their classmates. Reinhard emphasized 3 key points. First, how to get friends out of the garrison. Second, where to place them. And third, who is the traitor. Kento came to the conclusion that for now, he could only arrange for his friends to live in Walzard. He doubted that Walzard would be able to accommodate 200 people at once. He said it would be easier for him since he was alone, but 200 people would need a place to live, food, and work. Reinhard suggested that to solve the problem they would need to persuade Lord Klaus. Kento admitted that he would have to turn to Lord Klaus for help. Reinhard advised to wait a little while before rescuing his friends. Kento didn't understand why he had to wait, since, in his opinion, the sooner the better. Reinhard explained that, fortunately, Kento's friends were currently training. Kento understood the gist of the proposal and asked if they should continue training and let their friends gain strength. Reinhard confirmed that this is exactly what he is proposing. Kento emphasized that they would be passing through a demonic forest, and therefore the friends must be able to defend themselves. Reinhard replied that they couldn't protect everyone because they were made of bones. He added that there is one more reason. Kento asked in surprise what this additional reason was. Reinhard explained that Kent needed to become stronger, and the more they trained, the greater the chance that Mr. Klaus would perceive them as worthy and capable people. Kento agreed and emphasized that Reinhard was indeed reliable, as he had been a commander before. Reinhard laughed and said that he hadn't really done anything outstanding. Kento asked who Reinhard thought would be a suitable candidate for the role of traitor. After the conversation, Kento began training with Reinhard. Reinhard noted that Kento's progress was noticeable and his success was getting better. Inwardly, Kento realized that he was inspired by seeing his nemesis Camellia training. Reinhard suggested ending the training session there. Kento replied that he still had reserves of magical power. Reinhard recommended that Kento take a break, emphasizing that rest was also important. Kento agreed with Reinhard and admitted that he was right. He thought about what he should do in the remaining time. Thus, he headed to the eastern district of Walzard. Kento knew that women with children often came to this area even during the daytime. He thought that perhaps he would continue to live in this city and thought it would be worth looking around. Reinhard noted with irony that this was worthy of respect for Kento. The merchant offered a wide range of goods, including both used and new ones. Kento noticed the broken swords in the shop and asked if such goods could be used. Reinhard explained that sometimes the price of broken swords increases after they are reforged. Kento asked if it was possible to remake a broken sword into a dagger. Reinhard confirmed that this was possible. Kento noticed that one of the boys didn't have a sword in its sheath. Reinhard assumed that the man was into gambling, drinking, or women, and that he had probably sold his sword to buy something else. Kento added that such people are called missing adults. The man in the shop said he would take this item. The merchant thanked the buyer for his purchase. Kento inquired about the use of a broken sword. Reinhard suggested they wait a bit and observe how things would develop. Kento pointed to a brothel on the outskirts, assuming the man had gone inside. The girl who met them invited them to sit down and choose a place. Kento noted that such establishments often charge large sums of money and asked if this was true. Reinhard confirmed that they charge 3 times as much here as at the guild tavern and that it was clearly expensive. Kento asked if the man was looking for someone or waiting for someone. Reinhard replied that it looked like it. Kento wondered if this man was going to kill someone. Reinhard guessed that probably so, but he wasn't entirely sure. Kento grabbed the man's leg, causing him to trip. He warned that the man had drawn his sword and that they should be on their guard. The man became indignant, cursing the one who had interfered with him. The man ordered the woman to stop, but she ignored him and ran away. He was surprised that his leg wouldn't obey him. Several men stood around and said that he was in trouble and there was no need to make a fuss. Kento concluded that the man's target was that woman. Reinhard suggested that jealousy might have been the reason. Reinhard greeted Kento with good morning. Kento replied to Reinhard, wishing him a good morning as well. Kento mused that thanks to the special training with skeletons that had muscles instead of brains, he was able to build up some muscle mass. Suddenly, Mesa came in and forbade Kento from entering the dungeon. Kento, frightened, cried out her name. Kento thought that he should be able to handle his guild activities better now. When Kento arrived at the guild building, he encountered Mule and Jillik. Mule greeted Kento, noting that he seemed to have gotten stronger. Kento replied by wishing good morning to Mule and Jillica. Illik remarked dismissively that Kento was still weak and didn't understand how anyone could say he had become stronger. Mule remarked to Jillik that with such a character he would not become popular with girls. Jillik replied that it didn't matter to him because he wasn't interested in girls. Kento, a little surprised, asked whether Jillik was active or passive, asking each question in turn. Jillik asked irritably what Kento was thinking about. The men on the side began to talk among themselves, believing that Jillik really did feel that way. Mule said that she found out that Kento was going to class and came to watch, and Jillik stated that he came to see how he got beat up. Kento promised to try his best, hoping not to disappoint Mule. Mule wished Kento good luck. Kento noted that it looked like this was their meeting place. The man asked if Kento had come to this place for the first time. Kento confirmed that this was his first time here. The man asked whether Kento was more of a knight or a spellcaster. Kento replied that according to the Magic Ball's assessment, he was nothing special. The man consoled Kento by explaining that most of the people here were also new, and there was no need to be upset by such an assessment. The others noted that Kento was probably a newbie and his grade was low, but suggested that they try together and wished him luck. Kento felt relieved, thinking that these people seemed to be good. Donovan noticed that everyone was gathered and said that it was time to start classes. He noticed that Kento was the only newcomer present and praised him for not running away and for coming. Kento confirmed that he hadn't had much of a choice and couldn't have avoided the situation. Donovan agreed, noting that he had made the right decision. He then instructed everyone to don protective gear. After everyone was ready, Donovan said Kento could step forward. Kento hesitantly agreed. Donovan announced there would be sparring and invited Kento to choose his partners for the fight. Kento asked if it would start with sparring right away. Donovan confirmed that this would be the case, explaining that if Kento defeated 3 opponents, he would be able to attend other classes. He then again offered to choose the opponents. The men began vying with each other to ask Kento to choose them as sparring partners. Kento realized that Donovan had encouraged him to make others think he was weak and an easy target. He decided he wouldn't choose his partner and told Donovan to make the decision himself. Donovan asked if he was sure of his decision, suggesting he choose his strongest opponent. Then, with this in mind, Donovan assigned Isaku to be Kento's opponent. Izak agreed, but the others only expressed dissatisfaction. Kento thought Izak looked strong. Donovan explained that punches to the face are prohibited, but attacks to vulnerable areas are permitted. He added that the fight will end when he determines the opponent can be incapacitated. Izak was confident of his victory and thought that he would achieve it in an instant. Donovan gave the command to begin the fight. Kento dodged Isaac's attacks and managed to strike back. Isaac was stunned, not expecting such a reaction. Donovan declared Kento the winner. Mule, who was watching the fight, happily exclaimed that Kento was really cool. The other participants in the fight were surprised to see that Kento had won with one blow and began to discuss his success. Kento thought that the special training with Reinhard and the others had truly benefited him. He realized that without it, he would have lost just like he had with Jillik. Donovan announced the fight was on and asked Hellman to get ready. Hellman confirmed he was. Donovan gave the command to begin. In his thoughts, Hellman noted that Kento was not the worthless opponent he might be taken for, and there was no time to relax. Mule noticed that both fighters froze, not making a single movement. Kento figured Hellman had become increasingly wary after his previous victory with Isaac and was now preparing to defend himself. In that case, he decided to attack first. He rushed to attack while Hellman swung his sword in an attempt to parry the blows. Kento managed to land a punch on Hellman's glove. Hellman felt pain and expressed dissatisfaction. Donovan declared the fight over, and Kento was declared the winner. Mule cheerfully encouraged Kent. Jillik, standing nearby, noted that Kent was simply lucky. Reinhard turned to Kento, reminding him that he had one last victory left and urging him to focus. Kento replied that he hadn't been distracted and was ready. Donovan announced that the fight was on and asked Colt to get ready. Colt, noticing Kento's confidence, commented that he was strong for his age. Kento, surprised by his words, asked if he would fight without a shield. Colt replied that he shouldn't worry and should think about himself. Kento thought to himself, this opponent looks like a scary guy. Donovan gave the command to begin the fight. Colt quickly began swinging his sword. Kento, not expecting such aggression, asked in surprise what was going on. At that moment, Colt attacked him. Kento thought the blow had come too close and realized his training had paid off as he had managed to avoid serious injury. Colt continued his attack without pause. Kento, having dodged the blow, cursed the situation, but the next second he still fell. Donovan declared Colt the winner and said that was enough. Jillik remarked that Kento had deservedly lost, and Kento, falling to the ground, admitted that he had been blown to smithereens. Colt proposed to engage in battle. He then expressed his readiness to engage the enemy. Donovan, addressing Isaac, ordered him to engage Colt. Colt wondered why he couldn't choose his own opponent, but Donovan sharply asked if he intended to challenge his decision. Colt quickly replied that he hadn't meant that. Reinhard reminded Kento that he had made a mistake in giving in to the enemy's sudden attack. Kento admitted that he had been taken aback by the surprise. Reinhard explained that Kento could have won if he'd stayed calm and handled the attack. Kento, catching his breath, agreed. At this time, Colt engaged in combat with Isaac. Isaac landed a punch, after which Donovan declared the fight over. Reinhardt noted that forcing his opponent's pace made them much weaker. Kento confirmed this. Reinhardt then added that this opponent attacks randomly and doesn't even know the basics. If you disrupt his rhythm, he immediately loses his strength. Kento concluded that the loss had been beneficial as he had learned a valuable lesson. Reinhardt supported him, emphasizing the importance of learning from defeat. After the fight ended, Donovan again declared it over. Kento exclaimed in surprise that the fight had ended too quickly, noting Isaac's strength. Donovan gave the order to move on and told Kento to get ready. He answered in the affirmative. Isaac, turning to Kento, said that he would be more careful this time. Donovan expressed hope for a good fight and gave the command to begin. Kento, observing his opponent, noted that Isaac's gaze had changed significantly compared to their previous fight. At the same time, Isaac thought that victory would allow him to move on to his next training, and he no longer intended to repeat his previous mistakes. Mule asked Jillik if Kento would win this time. Jillik expressed doubt, saying he wasn't sure. Then Mule wished Kento good luck, and he, upon hearing her, turned his attention to her, calling her name. During the fight, Kento was able to dodge Isaac's first attack, noting the opponent's power. However, the second attack was too fast, and Kento was unable to dodge. Donovan declared Isaac the winner. Isaac, feeling the joy of victory, immediately turned to Kento, asking if everything was okay with him. Kento said he was fine, but admitted he needed to rest for a bit because he was in a lot of pain. Isaac noted that Kento was clearly not okay, as he had been hitting him with all his might. However, Kento assured him he was fine and added that his arm was simply numb. Isaac worriedly asked Donovan what to do next. Donovan replied that as soon as Kento felt a little better, Isaac should take him to the infirmary. He suggested that if it wasn't a fracture, it was most likely a fracture. Kento himself realized that his arm was indeed broken, and it was difficult for him to even speak. To ease his condition a little, Kento used healing magic. Mule, seeing his condition, worriedly asked if he was okay. Jillik suggested that Kento should have been more attentive and not gotten distracted. Isaac tried to stop Kento, warning him not to make any unnecessary movements. However, Kento assured everyone that he was almost fully recovered, noting that the numbness had passed. Isaac was surprised at how quickly Kento had recovered and praised him, emphasizing that he was quite strong for his build. Kento insisted that Donovan continue his studies, assuring him he was fine. Donovan asked incredulously if Kento was lying. Reinhard pointed out to Kento that he was overly focused on defense. Kento explained that this was due to the overwhelming thought that his opponent was stronger than him. He added that this could only be realized in real combat. Reinhard agreed and suggested adding sparring to his special training. Kento, after considering the offer, admitted that although it would be difficult for him, he would try to cope with it. He later recalled how he was able to win 3 fights in a row after that fight, feeling a sense of satisfaction from his success. Donovan praised Kento and informed him that the next practice would be on the same day next week. Kento initially agreed, but then looked surprised and asked what Donovan meant. Donovan, noticing his reaction, asked if he had anything to complain about. Kento hesitated but assured him everything was fine. Donovan added that the seniors, where Kento would be moving, would be much stronger and advised him to train hard. Mule wished Kento good luck. Kento, contemplating his upcoming promotion to the senior group, suddenly realized he was excited about it and was surprised by his reaction. Reinhard approached him at this point and advised him to continue moving at the same pace. Kento, slightly wary, asked if anything had happened. Reinhard reported that Kento was being followed. Kento, confused, began to clarify who they were talking about. Reinhard reassured him that there was no threat, but pointed out that he was being followed by 4 people who had been with him in class last week. Kento, hearing this, remembered how Manon and Ridnell left the training, citing their own business. Reinhardt explained that the 4 had been watching Kento from a hiding place during daytime classes. He assumed they were trying to discover the reason for his rapid progress. Kento, having understood what he heard, asked Reinhard what he should do. Later, Kento returned home, where Amanda greeted him and informed him that dinner was almost ready. Kento responded briefly and went about his business. At this time, Manon asked Ridnell if Kento was renting a room in this house. Ridnell confirmed her suspicions and suggested that Kento might be training after dinner. Manon tried to find out what exactly Kento was doing during training, but Ridnell admitted he didn't know. He guessed that there might be a high-ranking adventurer living nearby who was training Kento. Manon agreed with him, guessing that this adventurer was training Kento. Meanwhile, Kento, reflecting on the situation, noted that these people could hardly imagine him fighting a monstrous skeleton or training in a demonic forest. Reinhard turned to Kento and asked what they should do next. Kento, having thought it over, said he had an idea. Kento asked Amanda to call him when dinner was ready, saying that he was going to secretly practice with his sword. Amanda, after asking him if he was going to the dungeon, heard him answer that there was nothing to worry about and he was not going anywhere. In the courtyard, Kento began training. He swung his sword, then moved on to strange movements. Manon and Ridnell watched him, surprised, trying to figure out what he was doing. Their reaction was shared by the others. Amanda, seeing Kento's movements, asked what he was doing. Mesa suggested he must be crazy, assuming he'd been hit on the head. Kento explained that this was a training method from the most famous fencing school in his home country. Amanda remarked on how strange the movements looked. Kento replied that they appeared that way due to lack of experience, adding that the secret of the kokubu style lies in the waist. Amanda expressed surprise, specifying that it was in her lower back. Mesa stated that it was better to remain weak than to perform such strange exercises. Kento admitted that he doesn't yet fully understand the essence of this style, but emphasized that one can only become a master if one fully understands its foundation. In his thoughts, Kento admitted that his words were a blatant lie. Ridnell continued to doubt, and Manon began to suspect that there might be some meaning hidden in these movements. Reinhard, watching this scene, chuckled and remarked that Kento was a bad man. Kento, responding, explained that this was some kind of revenge for being abandoned and for Donovan now keeping a close eye on him. Later, during training, Kento expressed his willingness to entrust himself to Reinhard's skilled hands. He confirmed that he understood the task. Kento reasoned that the fastest way to master Donovan's training was to spar with Reinhard. He believed that Reinhard's strength, capable of dispatching goblins and ogres with a single blow, would make his training maximally effective. Reinhard announced the start, and Kento tried to say something but didn't have time to finish his sentence. He panicked and asked to wait at least a second. Reinhard, without slowing down, said that Kento's movements were too slow, expressing his disappointment. Reinhard refused to wait for Kento and demanded that he continue training. Kento, barely able to endure the exercises, exhaled. Reinhard apologized for his strictness, explaining that he intended to be demanding during training. Kento, though he had experienced difficulties, admitted that this kind of strictness was exactly what he needed. Reinhard praised his spirit, ending training for the day. Kento expressed gratitude to Reinhard for his assistance. In response, Reinhard noted that he was amazed by Kento's efforts, emphasizing that even in life, few people showed such diligence. Kento admitted with a smile that he'd been too lazy before, so now he had to work harder to catch up. Reinhard suggested that, at the current pace, they could complete the course in 2 weeks. Kento expressed hope that would be possible. Reinhard then asked if Kento was ready to continue his intensive training. Kento admitted that he would also like to practice magic. Reinhard asked what kind of magic he was talking about, and Kento explained that offensive light magic took too long to activate. He decided to practice to shorten this process. Reinhard noted that it took Kento longer to cast his spells than a typical mage. Kento added that light magic was powerful but difficult to use due to the lengthy preparation required, and he doubted he could hit a moving target. Reinhard suggested imagining the activation of magic as the pulling of a bowstring. Kento took the idea, comparing the process to shooting a bow, and tried it out by forming a gun-like gesture with his fingers. After counting to himself, Kento concentrated and activated his magic. He hit the target. Kento realized that the new method of activating magic was far more effective than he expected. By constantly repeating the steps, he was able to significantly reduce the time needed to prepare the spell. After finishing training, Kento suggested that they call it a day and go home, to which Reinhard agreed. On the way, they encountered a group of monsters. Kento asked Reinhard what kind of creature it was, asking if it was an ogre. Reinhard confirmed that it was indeed an ogre, but clarified that it was a stone ogre. He added that such monsters are distinguished by great strength and endurance, making them much more difficult to defeat. Kento, preparing for the fight, asked Reinhard to cover him in case he missed. Concentrating, Kento used light magic. He managed to hit the ogre, then continued the attack and destroyed all the monsters, including the stone ogre. After his victory, Kento noted that light magic was very effective, almost cheating, as it allowed him to defeat enemies in an instant without much effort. Reinhard was shocked. Kento, noticing this, apologized for not leaving monsters for him to enjoy. Reinhard assured him everything was fine, but emphasized that Kento had destroyed 4 ogres, including a stone one, with virtually no effort. Kento, smiling, promised to save the opponents for Reinhard next time. Reinhard, impressed by his skill, remarked that it was admirable. Kento finished his breakfast. Mesa, noticing that he ate a lot in the morning, asked if he trained at night. Kento replied that if that were the case, there would be noise in his room. Mesa agreed, but remained suspicious that he was hiding something. Kento tried to convince her that wasn't the case. Amanda asked where he planned to go to work today. Kento replied that he was going to visit the city wall construction site. Amanda told him to be careful. However, Mesa remained convinced that Kento was hiding something. Kento noted in his mind that Mesa's intuition was indeed good and that it irritated him. The walls of Walzard were expanded by adding new districts to the outer walls. The old city originally had a square perimeter, but now its boundaries became more oval. The construction of city walls constantly requires additional labor. This is the only type of work where workers are hired and paid directly, without the involvement of a guild. Those engaged in non-guild activities or running a business in the city are required to pay taxes. If a citizen is unable to pay the tax, they are given the opportunity to work off the debt by working on construction projects. A day's work building walls pays 350 helts, comparable to the salary in a potato warehouse. Most men living in the city typically participate in wall construction at least once a week and sometimes once a month. Kento arrived at the construction site and greeted Klaus. He was surprised by his arrival and asked if he really had no other work. Kento replied that upon learning of the construction of the walls, he wanted to make his contribution in gratitude to the city that had sheltered him. Klaus praised his determination and promised to show him what needed to be done. He wished Kento good luck that day. Kento was surprised to learn that Klaus would also be working. Klaus explained that the foreman gave the orders on the construction site and he was just a regular worker. As he worked, Kento realized how difficult the task was. Klaus, laughing, reminded him that he shouldn't have expected an easy task and noted that he was doing quite well for a first-timer. Kento asked Klaus why he was working at a construction site despite being the ruler of Walzard. Klaus explained that he wanted to personally make sure that everything was going as it should. He admitted that the reason for this approach is most likely his impatience. Kento wondered what Klaus meant by impatience. He explained that he was striving to make Walzard a safe place for future generations. Kento guessed the reason was the proximity of the demon forest. Klaus confirmed his guess, adding that, despite the apparent calm, the threat of monsters could arise at any moment. Then Klaus began to tell the story of the events of 25 years ago, when the ogres attacked the city. During the attack, the villagers panicked, and one of the ogres grabbed the girl, intending to eat her. She screamed and tried to break free. Klaus came to her aid in time and saved her. Upon learning it was Amanda, he ordered her to head immediately to the older part of the city, where it was safer. Amanda thanked Klaus for saving her, and he inquired whether there were any remaining residents. At that moment, Klaus noticed stone ogres, 3 of them nearby. The man, under attack, desperately cried out for help. Klaus rushed to calm him down, telling him to hold on. But at that moment, the ogre crushed the man completely, resulting in his death. Klaus, outraged by the situation, firmly stated that he would not allow anyone to do whatever they wanted in his city. By then, Donovan, who was also fighting the ogres, informed Klaus that this was already the 10th monster, but the attacks did not stop. Klaus told him that 3 more stone ogres had been discovered in the east and suggested leaving the current enemies to other fighters so he could go there with Donovan. Donovan agreed. Klaus explained that facing ogre-class monsters alone is impossible unless you're an A-rank adventurer or higher. Stone ogres are especially dangerous and can only be defeated with significant numerical superiority. At that moment, Donovan exclaimed, noticing a wounded man. The victim was missing an arm and a leg. Donovan rushed to him, trying to figure out what had happened. Klaus recognized his brother and immediately tried to calm him down. Klaus's brother, feeling weak, apologized for his failure. Klaus ordered him to remain silent and conserve his strength and told Donovan to call a healer immediately. Donovan quickly agreed. However, Klaus' brother, sensing the end was approaching, asked him to protect Walzard, expressing his faith in him. After these words, he died. Klaus, overcome with grief, tried to come to terms with his death, not believing that it had happened so suddenly. Continuing his story, Klaus recalled how he and Donovan had barely managed to fend off the attack that time. But if something like that happened again, the city would be in grave danger. Kento mused that the stone ogre might have been the same large creature he'd previously struck with his light magic. He recalled aiming his light magic just below the creature's horns. If it really was a stone ogre, Kento concluded its rank must be at least A. He then asked Klaus if stone ogres were truly that dangerous. Klaus explained that stone ogres were quite rare. He emphasized that they are significantly larger and stronger than ordinary ogres. As their name suggests, their skin is so hard that neither swords nor spears can pierce it. Klaus added that fighting such creatures was extremely dangerous, even if you put 5 or 6 fighters of Jilix level against them. Kento exclaimed in surprise, noting how strong these creatures were. Klaus asked with a smile if Kento was scared. Kento admitted he couldn't believe he'd managed to escape alive from a forest inhabited by such monsters. Klaus agreed with him and noted that the memory of such creatures sent shivers down his spine. However, Reinhard laughed as he fought the monsters, destroying them with one blow. He enjoyed the fight, saying it invigorated his body and soul. Kento recalled this and mentally noted that Reinhard, who was destroying ogres with ease, brought him joy and relief since he was his ally. The next day, Kento went to the guild as usual. Kento noticed that the room was very crowded. He approached Mr. Otto to ask why this was happening. Kento expressed surprise that people were acting as if something was wrong. He also wondered if the difference in compensation was too great. Otto replied that the reward was no more than 200 helts. However, he added that the more the man received, the more he could spend on an evening at the bar. Kento understood the answer and said it was all clear. Manon greeted Kento with a good morning, and Kento returned the greeting. Kento thought that he had been pretending to learn the kokubu sword style before, and now it felt awkward. Manon asked Kento if he was looking for a job. Kento confirmed that he was and asked if Manon was also looking for a job. Manon replied that yes, she had decided to start looking for a job today. Kento was surprised but didn't say anything unnecessary. Kento felt awkward again about the whole situation. Manon suggested that Kento look for a job together. Kento agreed but added that he had doubts. Reinhard intervened, noting that this was a continuation of their previous discussion, and addressed Kento as Lord. Kento realized that Manon wanted to know the secret of his development, and he felt that the situation was becoming awkward again. Kento commented that the crowd at the notice board was too big. Manon expressed doubt that she would be able to get through the crowd, since Ridnell, Maru, and Tarik were already in this cluster. Kento complained that he was tired even before he had to work. Kento asked what was wrong with Manon. He noticed that Manon had been staring at him repeatedly. Manon explained that she was simply looking at him, but then became afraid that something was wrong. Kento reassured her, saying he was simply wondering what kind of job would be perfect for her. Manon replied that she didn't care, she'd just do whatever Kento did. Kento was surprised and suggested they see what work remained on the notice board and then decide what to do. Kento thought that this was their way of trying their hand at being gardeners. The house of the gardener Oren was located in the 2nd district, not far from the walls of the old city. The old man asked if they had come on a mission and said that he was going to trim the bushes on his master's property. He added that he thought that the two of them wouldn't be enough, so he turned to the guild for help. An unknown man greeted Kento and Manon and offered to go to the master's domain. Kento and Manon agreed. The man told Kento and Manon to start weeding, and they agreed. Kento remembered how often he was punished with this activity for dozing off in class. Now, having started work, he decided to cut everything down to the roots, including every blade of grass, using a weed fork so as not to stop. Manon noticed his speed. The man praised Kento for his quick results and advised Manon not to worry, as the first time is always difficult, but she must keep trying. Manon agreed. Kento thought Manon was being forgiven for skipping some of the weeds and marveled at his luck in being so attractive. Klaus, seeing Kento, asked with a smile if he was working as a gardener today. Kento greeted him, wishing him a good morning, and confirmed that Klaus was right. He was trying his hand at various jobs. Klaus laughed and praised Kento for his willingness to try his hand at different activities. He noted that such experience would definitely come in handy in the future and advised Kento to take advantage of this opportunity while he had time. Klaus then introduced his daughter, Beatrice. Beatrice greeted Kento and stated her name. Kento, slightly embarrassed, returned the greeting and added that Beatrice had a very sensitive father. At the same time, he noted to himself that the girl had fiery red hair and brown eyes, full of will. Klaus mentioned that his daughter was probably a year younger than Kento and asked if he agreed she was cute. Kento, visibly embarrassed, confirmed it. Suddenly, Klaus's tone changed to a menacing one, warning Kento that if he let go of his grip, he'd be in trouble. Kento could only mutter an agreement. Beatrice intervened, concerned about her father's behavior, and asked if he was saying anything inappropriate to Kento. Klaus hastened to assure her that nothing of the sort was happening, turning to Kento for confirmation, who again only uttered an yeah. Beatrice, suspecting something was wrong but deciding not to investigate, wished Kento good luck in his work. Kento thanked him, adding that he would try his best, although his words were unclear due to his nervousness. As he left, Klaus quietly repeated, "If you let go, I'll hit you several times in a row." Kento, watching him, wondered what exactly he was muttering. Klaus said a brief goodbye. Kento, after talking to him, felt more exhausted than from the work itself. He wondered why Manon was looking at him so intently and tried to reassure himself by thinking that he was an ordinary person, nothing special. He said it was time to wrap things up. Kento remembered that Oren had invited them to dinner but had asked them to take a bath beforehand. Kento asked Manon if she agreed that they had done a good job. When Kento entered the bath, he was shocked. Manon blushed with embarrassment. Kento hastened to apologize, but Manon began to accuse him of being vulgar and a debauchee. Later, Manon, still irritated, chided him for not noticing she was a girl. Kento admitted his mistake. Manon, having calmed down a little, noticed that although she was small, Kento tried to justify himself, but only became even more confused. Manon was indignant again, and the strange man who was watching the scene laughed and asked Manon not to be offended by Kento. Kento finally repented of his behavior in front of Manon. The stranger tried to justify Kento, saying he hadn't done it out of malice. Oren reminded him that the food was getting cold and suggested they begin eating. Manon said she understood and hoped Kento was sorry. Kento, remorseful, confirmed that he was very sorry. Kento's mind began to wish that he would continue to be lectured, rather than reminded of what had happened. Kento remembered Oren suggesting they take a bath together and realized he hadn't noticed Manon was a girl. He remembered Oren's words again when he'd suggested they take a bath together after they finished. Kento agreed without hesitation. During dinner, when he tried the sausage, Kento noticed that it was very soft. The woman sitting next to him was pleased that he liked it and suggested he continue eating without embarrassment. Kento thanked her. Manon, watching Kento, was surprised at how much he could eat and wondered how he fit it all in. Kento, in turn, noticed that Manon had barely touched her food and advised her to eat right to be strong. He casually suggested it would help her breasts but quickly corrected himself, emphasizing the importance of nutrition for strength. Manon glared at him and Kento apologized, explaining that food was the foundation of health. Oren supported him, saying that they were both growing rapidly now and should eat without embarrassment. Kento and Manon wished each other bon appetit. After dinner, Kento remarked that it was very tasty and offered to walk Manon home, as it was already late. Manon was surprised, but Kento explained that it was dangerous for a girl to walk alone at night, and so he would walk with her, even though he himself was not a particularly reliable person. Manon thanked him and then asked how Kento had become strong so quickly. Kento was a little embarrassed, not knowing how to answer. Manon suggested it might have something to do with his training with Jillik. Kento's mind briefly trembled with the thought that he'd nearly revealed the details of his special training, but he quickly dismissed the thought. Manon asked if this was the same Jillik she was thinking of. Kento replied that he wasn't sure if there were other Jillikis, but that it was probably the same one. Manon was surprised and asked why he'd taken on his training. Kento, thinking about the situation, realized that Jillik was a person who stood out from the crowd. He suggested that perhaps they could practice the next day as well. Manon reacted with surprise, not understanding how that was possible. A thought flashed through Kento's mind. If Mule had practice tomorrow, there was a good chance Jillik would show up and train him again. He hoped Donovan would spot him in Jillik and ask him to train with him. Manon expressed hope that in this way she could help change the lives of Ridnell and others, to which Kento agreed. They agreed to try. Reinhard, noticing their conversation, asked if Kento had thought this through. Kento replied that if he showed everyone that he had become strong thanks to his training with Jillik, he wouldn't have to reveal the secret of his training. A thought crossed Kento's mind that they needed to train because they might have a rematch with Jillik. Even though Jillik had given in a bit in the past, Kento was not going to give in, even if it was difficult for him to find the right moment to counterattack. Kento noticed that despite being a demon forest, there weren't many monsters here. Reinhard explained that it was because of their aura hanging in the air. Kento understood and added that the goblins and kobolds, sensing it, would run away. Reinhard confirmed his words. However, they soon saw the monsters. Kento counted 6 of them, including a stone ogre significantly stronger than the one they had encountered previously. He offered Reinhard 3, leaving the remaining 3 to be his own task. Reinhardt said they were already having fun while everyone else was sleeping and suggested Kento kill all the monsters. Kento asked for backup just in case. Using light magic, Kento destroyed all the monsters one by one, completing the kill of the last one. Reinhard praised Kento for his excellent performance in the battle, stating that even they could not have done so well, and noted the amazing power of his attack. Kento modestly replied that he still had a lot of work to do to improve the rate of fire and adjust the power. Reinhardt, smiling, expressed his admiration for Kento's efforts and emphasized that this was expected of him. Kento, in turn, mentioned that Mr. Klaus had told him he hadn't seen a stone ogre in a long time. Reinhardt confirmed this, saying that such creatures were indeed rare. Kento wondered if this was related to some unusual phenomenon. Reinhardt explained that the variety and density of demons in the forest varied depending on location, and this section of the forest was quite deep, which could explain their presence. He also informed him that he would take care of collecting the magical stones and horns, so Kento could rest until the next day. Kento thanked him and went to rest. The next morning, when Kento met Manon, she noticed that something was wrong with him. Kento, a little embarrassed, said that she looked especially cute today. Manon, a little embarrassed, disagreed with him, declaring that she could not be nice. Jillik was surprised to see that Kento had brought a chibai assistant with him and asked what it meant. Kento greeted Jillik and asked if Mule was training. Jillik replied that it was none of his business and asked why Kento was asking. Kento explained that it didn't matter, he was just asking, and said that he had to go. He tried to leave, but Jillik grabbed him by the clothes. He demanded that Kento come with him, warning him that he would make sure he didn't disturb Mule. Kento, surprised and slightly worried, tried to free himself, and Manon, noticing his unease, said his name with alarm. Donovan stopped Kento and Jillik, asking where they were headed. Kento greeted him and wished him good morning. Donovan returned the greeting and assumed Kento was going to train with Jillik again. Kento confirmed he was going to train with Jillik and added that Manon would be joining them that day. Jillik reacted with surprise, and Donovan, impressed, praised Kento for inviting his friend along. Jillik asked Kento suspiciously what he was up to. Donovan, noticing his reaction, asked if Jillik had any objections. Jillik, slightly embarrassed, replied that he didn't think so. Kento chuckled softly, glad that his plan had worked. Donovan offered to show him how much stronger he had become and turned to Jillik, reminding him that he understood everything. Jillik reluctantly agreed, adding that he wanted to get it over with as soon as possible. Kento declared it was time to begin and prepared for battle. Jillik, watching Kento closely, urged him on, demanding that he stop hesitating and begin the attack. Manon called out to Kento with concern, but he began the attack. Jillik responded immediately, saying that it was too late, and struck. Kento managed to dodge and attacked again, surprising Jillik. He barely had time to curse, noticing how much Kento had picked up the pace. Donovan was also impressed. Jillik, outraged by Kento's intensity, told him that he had clearly gotten too carried away. However, despite Jillik's attempts, Kento dodged and, in response to the attack, delivered a precise blow to Jillik's arm. Jillik cried out in pain, and Donovan, seeing this, announced that the winner was Kento. Kento celebrated his victory with pride. After Kento defeated Jillik, he felt satisfied with his victory because everything went as he planned. Mule praised him, and Kento, smiling happily, asked if she had come to support him. Then he noticed Manon staring at him and was surprised. Donovan, ignoring their conversation, announced that Manon must now fight. Manon, very nervous, trembled with fear, and Jillik, impatient, hurried her. Kento noticed that Jillik seemed angry with him. Donovan, hearing this, sternly reminded Jillik to behave, to which he quickly agreed. He defeated Manon in a duel, after which Donovan announced that Kento would be next. Kento, preparing for the fight, said that he was counting on Jillik. Jillik, holding back a smile, warned him to be prepared and added that he recognized his merits, calling him a funny little impudent fellow. Kento asked with a grin if Jillik meant to say that he recognized his skills. Jillik attacked, throwing a punch at Kento that he found too fast. Then Jillik attacked again and wondered why Kento didn't counterattack. Kento realized that if he continued at the same pace, he would lose, and decided to take action. Donovan noticed that Jillik was exploiting Kento's lack of confidence in his attack and defense, and this seemed to tip the fight in Jillik's favor. Kento, realizing this, was upset. Jillik attacked Kento again, hitting him in the back, causing him to lose his balance and fall. Jillik noted with a sneer that he thought Kento had broken a couple of bones, and Donovan, confirming his words, said that he heard an unpleasant crunch. Kento, feeling pain in his ribs, quickly realized that his bones were indeed broken and needed to be healed as quickly as possible. Manon and Mule worriedly asked if Kento was okay. Donovan, noticing Kento's condition, asked how he was feeling. Kento, having caught his breath, replied that everything was fine. Donovan, noticing that Kento's bones were healing too quickly, expressed suspicion that something was wrong with him. He added that he had begun to doubt Kento ever since he was beaten by Izak, and now questioned his true identity. He grabbed Kento by the clothes and began dragging him, suspecting he might be a spy from Riesenberg. Donovan warned him that if Kento didn't resist, he wouldn't harm him. Kento calmly agreed. Manon called out to Kento with concern. Just then, Baston appeared, announcing an emergency. Kento exclaimed his name in surprise. Baston reported an emergency. Orcs from the demon forest were heading towards them. The soldiers told Donovan that a horde of orcs was moving towards them, and he exclaimed in surprise that this was happening right now. He turned to Kento, asking if he had anything to do with this threat, and demanded to be given the key to the library. Donovan left Kento in the library, telling him he didn't have time for him right now and to sit quietly. Kento, trying to protest, cried out, but Donovan had already left. The man, running in panic, screamed for help, hoping that someone would hear him. But he didn't have time to run far and fell. The orcs caught him and ate him. The soldiers were ordered to prevent the enemies from entering the city and to immediately prepare jade stones for defense. They soon began firing arrows, trying to hold back the attackers. Reinhard expressed concern, saying that suspicions had already been aroused. Kento replied that nothing could be done about it now. He also asked Baston how many ogres were in the attacking forces. Baston said there were about 200 of them, adding that some of them might be stone ogres. Kento noted that the enemy force was too numerous for the garrison and adventurers to handle. Baston agreed, warning that if they fought conventionally, the losses would be enormous. Kento decided to take action and said they would handle the situation. He called Fred, who replied that he was already there and ready to act. Kento, determined, said it was time to begin. The soldiers prepared for the next stage of defense, ordering the mages to aim accurately. They waited for the enemy to emerge from the forest. The soldiers declared they would not allow them to win and began to repel the attacks. One of the magicians tried to stop the advance, shouting that he was doing everything he could. Ogres began to make their way through the walls. One of the magicians said that he hit one of them. However, the soldiers continued the battle, demanding that the magicians not allow the enemy to enter the city. When the ogres finally broke through the wall, the attack began in earnest. The mages screamed in rage and continued to fight their enemies. One of the mages hit the ogre, reporting that it was his throw. The soldier noted that more jade stones needed to be prepared as the battle was ongoing. The mage, irritated, pointed to the jade stones and told the soldier that they were already ready. The soldier, having checked, reported that one enemy had been eliminated and reminded that it was necessary to prevent even one ogre from getting into the city. They continued to fight, shouting commands and demanding that the advance be held back. When the stone ogre appeared, panic broke out, but the soldiers tried to maintain their composure and continued to fight despite the new threats. The mages continued to throw jade stones at the ogres, hoping to halt their advance. The soldier charged the stone ogre but cried out as he realized he couldn't penetrate its defenses. He realized he couldn't cut through its armor. The ogre grabbed the soldier and threw him into the air, where the other ogres below ate him. Kento was shocked to see all this cruelty. The moment when he himself was captured by goblins and they greedily began to eat him immediately popped into his head. He reflected that the only reason he was able to easily deal with the regular and stone ogres was because he could attack them from a safe distance. Before they could engage him in close combat, he picked them off. The ogre's monstrous strength, their loud roars, and bloodshot eyes made his body tremble. To these creatures, humans were mere food, and this made him feel weak and helpless before their fury. Reinhard, noticing Kento's hesitation, turned to him, saying they awaited his instructions. Kento seemed a bit taken aback and didn't respond immediately, but soon said that the situation required immediate intervention. Reinhard continued, adding that if the stone ogre broke into the city, Amanda, Mesa, and Manon would also be in danger. Kento finally came to his senses and realized that these monsters couldn't be allowed into the city. He firmly declared that this would not be allowed. Reinhard urged Kento to give the order because the time for thinking had already passed. Kento thought for a moment, but soon made a decision and said that they needed to destroy all the ogres, leaving not a single one. Reinhard immediately supported his decision with joy, declaring that they would exterminate them to the last one. Reinhard, Bast, and Fred, hearing the order, quickly began the attack. Reinhard, with a bright laugh, said he hadn't competed with Baston in a while and now they could test their strength again. Baston, in turn, responded with interest, asking if this was how Kento wanted them to act. Fred added that all he would have to do was collect magic stones and horns, which was also part of their task. Kento, feeling that he could not remain on the sidelines, also prepared for action and said that he must not lag behind his comrades. Meanwhile, one of the soldiers, seeing what was happening, screamed in panic that he did not want to die. The The second soldier couldn't break through the stone ogre and didn't know what to do. Kento used light magic to destroy the stone ogre. The soldiers, surprised by this, began to ask what had happened, because they could not understand how the ogre had been killed. Kento, catching his breath a little, said he'd made it in time, otherwise it could have ended tragically. He didn't want the death toll to rise. The soldiers, meanwhile, continued their fight, insisting that no one be distracted. They fought the ogres, but the situation was becoming increasingly hopeless. The monsters continued to scale the walls, and the soldiers felt it was futile. There were too many of them, and they couldn't handle that many enemies. They also spotted another stone ogre. The situation was becoming critical, and the soldiers panicked, shouting that even if Kento declared himself weak, they wouldn't be able to stop the monsters. One of the soldiers cried out for help, begging for someone to take down these ogres. Kento, using stealthy light magic, attacked the ogres, destroying them one by one. The soldiers, watching the scene, exclaimed in surprise as the ogres fell for no apparent reason, unable to comprehend what was happening. The soldier was surprised to see the ogres dying one after another. Donovan, also stunned by what was happening, asked what was going on here and what was happening to them. The soldier replied to Donovan that they themselves did not know what was going on, adding that no one was clearly attacking the ogres. At this time, one of the soldiers expressed his surprise that the skeletons that appeared on the battlefield were incredibly strong. Donovan asked them to assess the losses and be on guard, to which the soldiers responded affirmatively. He continued his reasoning, adding that they could not yet say for sure whose side these skeletons were on, doubting their intentions. Baston said mockingly that if anyone wanted to go further, they would have to deal with him. Fred, in turn, stated that the enemies were too slow. Reinhard also called them boring and that they were too weak. Donovan couldn't figure out where these strange skeletons had come from and asked the soldiers. One of them replied that he didn't know where they came from, claiming they'd suddenly appeared out of nowhere and were now, as everyone could see, fighting. Donovan, puzzled again, asked where they had come from, and one of the soldiers suggested they might have appeared under the city walls. However, the soldier clarified that they had been so busy fighting that they hadn't noticed it before. Meanwhile, Reinhard, laughing, said with satisfaction that he hoped everyone was all right. The soldiers continued to discuss what was happening when one of them informed Donovan that all the ogres had been destroyed. Donovan couldn't believe his ears and asked again. At this time, Ridneely, hearing about the end of the battle, was surprised, saying that he was just about to go into battle, but it seemed he was too late. Kento, having completed his mission, returned to the library, thinking that he seemed a little tired. He felt tired and, upon entering the library, fell asleep. Donovan, approaching Kento, called loudly, trying to wake him. Kento, waking, only responded half asleep, but his eyes instantly opened when he remembered the ogre. Donovan, noticing his reaction, exclaimed, expressing displeasure that Kento looked rather happy after everything that had happened. He grabbed Kent by his clothes and dragged him, causing Kento to cry out in pain from his neck as he tried to resist. Donovan threw him on the couch and Klaus appeared, watching with interest, saying that he heard that Kento had done something unusual. Kento, a little surprised, recognized him and apologized for disturbing him. Klaus, turning to Donovan, asked if he was claiming that Kento was a spy from Riesenberg. Donovan replied that it was unlikely, but he still didn't rule out the possibility, noting that Kento was too good and suggested testing him just in case. Klaus said that he needed to talk to Kenta and first of all find out who he was. Kento thought for a moment before answering, realizing that he needed to clear up some questions first before revealing his identity and asking for help. He apologized for his secrecy and revealed that he had been summoned from another world by Camellia Riesenberg. Hearing this, Klaus stood up in shock, unable to believe his ears. Donovan, also puzzled, asked if he was serious. Kento, calmly continuing the conversation, confirmed that yes, it was true, and offered to tell his story about arriving in this world. He began to explain in detail everything that had happened since his conscription, and told of the 200 high school students who had been conscripted not as heroes, but as soldiers. All of them should have had higher magical power than the locals, but everyone except him had their magic suppressed by magic bracelets. Kento continued that he was told to go through the forest to prove his suitability, and it was there that he first summoned skeletons when he was attacked by goblins. After that, he used self-healing magic to heal his wounds. Klaus, watching Kento in surprise, began asking questions. He pointed out that summoning skeletons was a dark magic while healing magic was a light magic, and wondered if this meant Kento possessed both types of magic. Kento, slightly embarrassed, confirmed that this was indeed the case, and added that this was probably why the magic ball designed to determine magical power did not work on him. Donovan, thinking about the recent battle, also wondered if the three skeletons fighting the ogres were actually created by Kento. Kento confirmed this, explaining that he had summoned the skeletons to have fun with the ogres. Klaus, recalling this episode, reminded Kento that he had used skeletons against bandits and asked if he knew about it. Kento was surprised, not understanding where Klaus had gotten such information. Klaus, in turn, replied that he was the Baron of this city, and reported that the noise about the monster within the castle walls had attracted attention. Kento apologized, explaining that the bandits had threatened him with a knife, and he had been forced to resort to using the skeletons in response. Klaus, after listening to him carefully, clarified that the skeletons were under Kenta's complete control, like familiars. Kento, a little hesitantly, confirmed this, adding that Reinhard and the other skeletons do not harm people and that he believes in their good intentions. Donovan, however, noted that the skeletons were still monsters, to which Kento replied that despite their origins, they had become family to him and he truly believed in their good nature. Donovan suggested that Kento register the monsters he controls, explaining that there are many tamers who tame monsters for use. He added that if Kento registered them, he wouldn't have to worry about problems on the streets in the future. Kento, having absorbed the information, replied that he understood. Afterwards, Kento continued to talk about how he saw his classmates undergoing training at the Lastok garrison and expressed his confusion about the princess's goals. He explained that he was now in Walzard, realized that he had deceived Klaus, and admitted his selfishness but asked for help in saving his classmates. Klaus asked Kento to raise his head, and then he bowed to him, which greatly shocked Kento. Klaus thanked Kenta for saving the city from the ogre horde, noting that if not for his intervention, the number of casualties could have been colossal. Kento, embarrassed by such a gesture, asked Klaus to raise his head. Klaus apologized to Kento, saying he couldn't fulfill his request despite all the help he'd given. Kento, hearing this, didn't hide his surprise. Klaus explained that there were two reasons why he couldn't help. The first is the uncertainty in Camelia Riesenberg's actions. If it is an act of aggression, they will be able to intervene, but if it is a civil war or a fight against monsters, help will be impossible. The second reason was the existence of slavery in Riesenberg, while in Landshelt it had been abolished. An attempt to free the slaves could lead to international conflict. Kento, realizing the danger of the situation, asked whether it would lead to war. Klaus confirmed his fears, adding that he could not decide the fate of all of Landshelt alone, despite Kento having saved his city. He asked for forgiveness and admitted that he could not do more. Despite these words, Kento asked Klaus to look up and offered an alternative. He proposed solving two problems. If his classmates could get rid of the slave bracelets and cross the demon forest on their own, it could change the situation. Klaus, surprised by Kenta's decision, asked if he had a plan. Kento admitted, a little hesitantly, that the plan was not yet fully developed, but he outlined the basic ideas. Klaus, after listening to him, remarked that he wanted his friends to continue training and gain strength. Donovan, standing nearby, also expressed surprise at how Kento had factored all the informants into his plan. However, Klaus warned that they wouldn't be able to act immediately. Monster outbreaks usually last for several days, and they would have to wait before they could begin releasing them. Kento, while agreeing that now was not the right time for a rescue operation, admitted that, as Klaus had said, it should wait. Donovan told Kento that there was no time for a rescue mission now, but there was always time for training. He noticed that Kento was training with the skeletons, which looked suspicious, especially when he suddenly became stronger. Donovan suggested training Kento publicly so no one would suspect him of anything strange. Kento tried to slip into the shadows, but Donovan laughed and told him not to be shy. Kento, lost in thought, asked if the training would be complete when he completed the next course. Donovan replied that training never ends and that people live to learn and train their entire lives. Kento, a little taken aback, didn't know what to say. Kento, a little confused, asked if his training would end after the next course. Donovan replied that training never ends and everyone lives to learn and improve until the end of their days. Kento spoke, a little confused. Donovan noticed his hesitation and asked if he had any complaints. Kento quickly replied that he had none and expressed hope for continued success with his training. Klaus reminded Donovan that Kento was the city's benefactor, so he had to train him so he wouldn't die accidentally. He also expressed a desire to see Kento's skeletons in person. Kento agreed, adding that it would be a good idea to introduce Klaus to them before registering them. He summoned his skeletons. Kento, introducing each of his skeletons, noted the titanium Baston, the former squad leader, the metal Reinhard, the leader of the knightly order, and the jet black Fred, the commander of another squad. Klaus was pleased to meet them and apologized for his selfish request, asking for help in case a horde of monsters attacked the city again. Kento agreed to help, noting that this city was also important to him. Klaus expressed his gratitude, adding that, despite possible displeasure, he was even grateful to Princess Camellia for such a gift. Klaus shook Reinhard's hand, and Kento felt ashamed and decided in his mind that when he grew up, he wanted to become just like Klaus. After the soldiers had finished drinking, one of them asked Donovan about the skeletons. Donovan replied that he didn't know them but emphasized that they had defeated the ogres, and that was enough. He turned to Kent, who confirmed his words. One of the soldiers agreed with Donovan, adding that the casualties weren't that high. Kento, with a hint of dissatisfaction, noted that there were too many men around and he found it disgusting. He wondered where the women and harem events were. At the Lastok garrison, a boy who introduced himself as Yagi Yusuk claimed to be the youngest person to win a Pulitzer Prize for his reporting. He began to describe the entire situation in detail, telling how it all began and what happened. It happened during the third lesson when a mysterious light suddenly appeared. In this light, he was met by a proud woman with blonde hair pulled back into curls who introduced herself as a princess. The princess offered him a choice between submission and death. He realized that they had been called because they were masters of magic and were promised a reward for good work. Yagi thought that he could become a hero and make a fortune. His main goal was to make a name for himself worldwide as a journalist. He planned to return to Japan and publish his report, preferring to avoid attracting unnecessary attention. Among the students was the popular basketball player Takayama Shuichi, who possessed powerful fire magic and could be sent to the most dangerous areas. The school idol, Yuka Ashikawa, possessed rare light magic, primarily used for healing, and would likely not be sent to dangerous areas. There was also another person who stood out, but in the opposite sense, Kokubo Kento. He was useless, considered by others to be trash, the king of all losers. After being called up, they were transferred to the city garrison, but it appears that 6 teachers were sent elsewhere. They were isolated, perhaps to prevent a possible rebellion among the groups. He came the next morning to listen to the proud princess with blonde hair. But he was completely broken when he learned that Kokubo Kento was dead. Even experienced warriors heading into the demon forest must be alert and march in formation. It was said that it was best to travel through the forest during the day and at night build a large fire and post lookouts. If an ordinary Japanese schoolboy were to find himself in such a forest, he would become easy prey for monsters. This call was the worst possible one, and Yagi decided to focus on only one thing: how to survive and return to Japan. He heard that the other students, designated warriors, were going to Ashikawa for treatment after training. Since there were so many of them, it seemed likely that everyone would be sent for treatment. Yuko asked the boy to try even harder, and he agreed. The soldier ordered the next one to come faster. Yagi, watching the scene, thought the smirks of those around him were frightening him. He noticed that the most unfortunate of all was probably Funiyama, who was causing a lot of trouble and was afraid that the princess had decided to destroy him. Despite his behavior, few people sympathized with him. Yagi noted that they should be on guard because tomorrow could be their last day. The man hit Funiyama and said that he couldn't even cast a spell properly. The girl intervened and asked them to stop, adding that if they continued, Funiyama could die. Yagi thought about the girl, Ayako Suigama, who was a legal lowly teacher and an exception among the others because she was mistaken for a student. The man told her that it would be better for her to do her job silently. Yagi reflected that while they were living such a hard life, those who were lucky were given decent food and shelter while they were eating tasteless food. He thought it would be nice if Takayama died, considering him spoiled. Takayama had a separate floor with his own maid who stayed with him from morning until evening. In a real fight, Yagi believed Takayama should be wary not of monsters but of attacks from behind. Yagi continued to think about the first chapter of his report, which he believed would cause a sensation. A week after the ogre attack, Kento came to observe. He asked Reinhard if anything had changed since then. Reinhard replied that he hadn't noticed anything unusual, adding that they couldn't use self-healing like others did. Kento wondered if the lazy hero's magic might be a result of his predisposition, to which Reinhardt confirmed that he probably had talent. Ayako concentrated and began casting a spell, calling upon mana to gather in her hand and fill the orb, making it solid and powerful. Slowly and surely, she filled it with magical energy, gradually transforming it into a stable and sturdy object. The man watching her work approved of her efforts, noting that she had made the ball hard and uniform. However, he added that she now needed to work on her speed. Ayako thanked him and confirmed that she understood. Kento asked if Ayako should be somewhere else, to which Reinhardt pointed out that teachers weren't usually there. Kento suggested that Ayako looked younger, so she might have been mistaken for a student. He noted that she was well suited for the role of liaison despite the fact that she was a trainee, since she was older than them and everything should be fine. Reinhardt agreed, noting that earthbenders usually don't stand out and that Ayako would be unnoticeable. He added that she would be perfect for the role. The man kicked Funayama and called him a loser, saying that he couldn't even cast a spell properly. Funayama in turn apologized and begged for mercy. Kento noticed that Funayama had become very thin and weak. Reinhard suggested he was being used as a demonstration to show the consequences of disobedience. Kento became intrigued and asked what he meant. Reinhard explained that even a man like Funayama couldn't stand up to Riesenberg. If they had rebelled, they would have been punished in the same way to intimidate others. He also suggested that Funayama's slave bracelet might have been enhanced to have a stronger effect on him. Kento realized that Funayama's spells were failing because of the bracelet. Ayako asked Funayama to stop hitting him, noting that it wouldn't make him any better at casting spells. The man responded in a threatening tone, suggesting she take a beating too if she didn't comply. Ayako continued, asking for the violence to stop, noting that Funayama was already weakened physically and mentally, and in his current state, he would not be able to complete the spells. The man disagreed, arguing that it was impossible to show weakness. Those who fight monsters risk their lives when casting spells, and if the spells fail, the monsters will eat them. Ayako offered to take over the spells and asked Funayama to focus on creating the balls. The man reacted sharply, calling her a fool. He explained that if even one of them failed, it would all be over. They needed fully fledged mages, not people who couldn't do their job. Kento wondered how he could contact teacher Ayako. Reinhard suggested sending a letter to avoid a meeting and reduce the risk of being noticed. Kento agreed, noting that this would reduce the chance of being noticed. Reinhard suggested leaving the letter somewhere Fred could find it. Kento remembered Yuko and expressed interest in knowing how she was feeling. At this time, the woman, holding her child in her arms, desperately screamed, begging for help. She asked why Yuko couldn't save her child since she helped Mari. The soldier tried to calm her, reminding her that the saint had healed her before she lost consciousness. But the woman could not calm down and continued screaming, begging for her child to be brought back to life. Reinhard noted that Yuko was in a difficult situation and that it seemed the girl had already died. Kento approached the girl and, touching her, realized that her heart was not beating, although her body was still warm. He realized that healing magic would no longer help and even thought about indirect heart massage. However, he had to come out of the shadows to do this. He realized with rage that, despite his strength, he could not help one girl. Reinhard, observing the situation, said they were powerless to help because the baby's heart wasn't beating. Kento realized he had to act. The woman desperately pleaded for help, begging to save the baby. Kento realized that without a heartbeat, there was no hope. Reinhard, seeing the situation, expressed doubt that even with great magical powers, they couldn't save the child. He reflected that inside the human body there is no light, only darkness. Kento decided that he had a hand and could try performing direct cardiac massage. He set about trying to help with determination, telling himself that even though this might be a mistake, he couldn't sit idly by if there was even the slightest chance he could help. He began the procedure, hoping the child wouldn't die, even while realizing his actions could be fundamentally flawed. The maid tried to stop Yuko, warning her that she couldn't help, but Yuko, despite her doubts, decided to try again. The woman, worried about the child's fate, begged the saint to do everything in her power to save his life. Yuko concentrated and began casting a spell, trying to gather the mana to save the child. However, despite her best efforts, she was unable to complete the spell and felt her strength draining. She was in despair, not understanding why she could not save the child, despite her level increasing and her ability to self-heal. The woman again begged the saint for help. The soldier, seeing Yuko's strength waning, shouted that the saint was already at the limit of her abilities. Yuko continued to worry, not knowing what else could be done to save the girl. The maid addressed her again, calling her Holy Lady. Kento, realizing that the girl's willpower was also crucial to her salvation, encouraged Yuko, saying that her life depended on her will to fight. He encouraged the girl's heart to keep beating. Reinhard warned Kento that if he continued to use so much magic, he would not be able to move forward. But Kento continued working, counting his actions. He continued performing cardiac massage and soon felt healing magic begin to circulate through the girl's body. Then he gathered all the remaining magic and passed it on to her. The girl opened her eyes and woke up, which caused delight among the soldiers. They were glad that she came back to life. The woman hugged her daughter and thanked the saint, declaring it a true miracle. The girl, waking up, said she was in pain. Kento returned to Walzard. He was glad that the girl had finally been rescued and grateful that Yuko was okay. Reinhard noted that this was expected from Kento, but Kento himself felt that perhaps he had gone too far. Reinhard asked if he could help with anything. Suddenly, Kento collapsed and Reinhard let out a worried cry. When Kento came to, he couldn't understand how he ended up at home. Reinhard explained that he simply told Donovan and asked him to take Kento home. Kento, a little puzzled, asked how exactly Reinhard had informed Donovan of the situation. Reinhard explained that he had used notes explaining that Kento had fought off an attack by a pack of ogres and was very tired. Kento agreed, but noted that he felt he had a tough training session ahead. Reinhard, hearing this, laughed, joking that Kento was clearly not too excited about the upcoming classes. Kento guessed Amanda was very worried about him. Reinhard, smiling, noted that Donovan had managed to convince everyone he was fine. Kento then thought about it and asked if he had passed out due to overusing magic. Reinhard confirmed this, adding that he had never seen a person whose heart had already stopped coming back to life, and that even the royal healers did not have such an ability. Kento realized that his return to life was made possible by the healing magic of light. Reinhard, addressing Kento, said that whoever had performed the miracle was an extraordinary and unprecedented person. Kento replied that it wasn't so much his strength, but rather what he was given, and that he should train more. He added that Camelia's plan had its flaws. Reinhard agreed, adding that Camelia was certainly cautious and ruthless. Kento asked if this was an expression of royal power. Erd suddenly appeared on the ceiling. He said he wasn't sure that was all that mattered. Kento noticed something was wrong with Fred, who explained that Camelia was very popular among humans. People considered her a benevolent princess. Reinhard added that he believed Camelia drew a clear line between friend and foe. Hearing this, Kento asked if this meant Camelia was trying to get closer to the people in order to exploit them to the fullest. He wondered if they had been summoned for the sake of the people. Reinhard admitted that the likelihood of this was very high. Kento remarked that this was rather unpleasant, since if he became hostile toward Camelia, these people could become his enemies. Reinhard expressed his concerns, saying that this was precisely what he feared. Kento noted that he wanted to avoid situations where he could harm the people of Riesenberg. Fred suggested focusing on the future and considering what to do after rescuing Kento's friends. Kento agreed, realizing they were in no position to negotiate now. Reinhard reminded that they would still have to be prepared for a possible fight with Riesenberg. Kento, feeling the weight of responsibility, said it was a big burden for a teenager, but at the same time he felt a thrill at the thought of fighting an entire country. Reinhard laughed and praised Kento's spirit and said that if he started the battle, they would gladly follow him. Fred added that there was no need to worry because their master would certainly win. Kento wondered how many people could move freely in the shadows like he could. Reinhard replied that there were many mages in their time, but he had never met anyone who used the shadow world so freely. Kento was surprised that not all dark mages could use this ability. Reinhard explained that while he had heard of such mages, he had never encountered one himself. Fred confirmed that Kento was an exception, adding that dark mages had been few in number for a long time, and that most of them were self-taught. Kento, thinking, asked what he needed to do to counter the fire magic of the hero he called a mediocre one. Fred explained that such magic is typically countered with a metal shield. However, he warned that if the shield isn't held at the correct angle, the fireball could explode and spread fire across the area. Reinhard added that the best way to protect oneself from magic is to use an interdimensional spell. Kento, intrigued, asked how the interdimensional spell worked. Reinhard, explaining that he'd never seen such a spell himself, said he'd heard of a spell called Dark Shield, which creates a defense by absorbing all magic. Kento, hearing about this, joked that such phrases give him 8th grader syndrome. He clarified that the Dark Shield repels all magic and inquired whether other magic could penetrate the Shadow Realm. Reinhardt replied that it was entirely possible. Kento, pondering, decided to try using the Dark Shield. Reinhardt suggested that Kento rest for now. Kento agreed, asking to be woken as usual. Reinhard confirmed he would comply. The old man, noticing something strange, asked what was missing, as if sensing the absence of a person. Yagi explained that Funyama was still sleeping. The old man, with a displeased expression, ordered that this fat bastard be woken up. Yagi, irritably agreeing, muttered to himself why this task fell to him and went to wake Funyama, trying to rouse him. He noticed something strange and was perplexed. Meanwhile, Kento, having woken up, turned to Amanda, greeting her and apologizing for the trouble he had caused. Amanda noticed that he seemed to be okay now, although when they brought him in he looked like a corpse. Kento admitted he didn't remember anything that happened. Amanda warned him that working hard was good, but it wouldn't do any good if he compromised his health. Mesa supported her, adding that Kento wasn't ready yet and needed to be careful. Kento then asked her not to move the carrots to him. Kento arrived at the guild and immediately noticed the commotion at the notice board. A crowd of people were discussing missions, and Ridnell and company, as usual, were right in the center. By all appearances, they were having a great time. Manon walked up to him and greeted him. Kento responded in kind, to which Manon asked what work he was planning to do today. Kento said he planned to take the day off. Manon, surprised, asked if something was wrong. Kento assured her that everything was fine, he'd just overdone it a bit yesterday. Manon, hearing this, thought for a moment and remarked that perhaps she should take a day off too. Kento, surprised by her reaction, wondered if Manon was truly worried about him. While he was pondering this, Manon drew his attention to herself. Kento, a little embarrassed, apologized, explaining that he was simply lost in thought. Manon, with warmth in her voice, advised him to try hard but not to overdo it. Kento apologized to Manon for making her worry. At that moment, Fred came up with a serious look, saying that he needed to talk urgently. Kento, a little embarrassed, lied to Manon that he was going to the restroom and promised to return, to which she replied that she would wait for him. As he walked away with Fred, Kento noticed that he hadn't spoken so closely to a girl since kindergarten, and mentally thanked Walzard for the opportunity. He then turned to Fred, asking what had happened. Fred broke the tragic news: Funyama had died. Kento was shocked and asked again, not believing what he heard. Fred confirms that Funyama had died, adding that they had tried to wake him up in the morning, but he never woke up. Kento immediately suspected that it was the work of one of the enemies, but Fred explained that the death was probably due to overwork and poor nutrition. Kento, upon hearing of Funyama's death, became concerned and asked how the village chief was reacting. Fred replied that the saintly lady was in a state of deep shock. She feels a strong responsibility for what happened and tried unsuccessfully to cure Funyama for some time, despite the fact that he was already dead. Kento, hearing what had happened, made his decision without hesitation. He firmly declared that he was going to Lastok. Recovering from the news, he decided to leave the guild. He apologized to Manon, citing poor health, and said he was going home. Manon, concerned about his condition, offered to walk him home, but Kento declined, adding that everything was fine and saying goodbye. When he reached Lastok, he noticed that people were training despite the tragedy. Kento indignantly asked why they were continuing as if nothing had happened. Fred explained that they were pretending Funyama never existed. Kento, seething with anger, couldn't contain himself. He shouted accusations, demanding an explanation, and bitterly declared that, in their opinion, the man was worthless. Reinhard, noticing his condition, tried to calm him down, reminding him that all these people were hostages of the situation. Kento only exhaled heavily, clenching his fists in frustration. At that moment, Baston approached and announced that the saint was in another part of the camp. Kento immediately remembered her and headed there. There he saw Yuko, who tirelessly healed people. One of the elders thanked her for the treatment, admiring her abilities. However, Yuko, ignoring her own exhaustion, demanded that the next one be brought to her. The maid, concerned about Yuko's condition, tried to persuade her to rest, warning her that she couldn't handle the strain. But Yuko persisted in demanding the next patient, oblivious to her own condition. Yuko, healing one after another, began to lose strength. The maid, noticing this, rushed to catch her to prevent her fall, but Yuko pushed her hand away. The saint's voice was a mixture of anger and despair. She sternly ordered the next victim to be called, despite her own condition. The maid tried to object, concerned about her mistress's condition. Breaking into a scream, she vented her pent-up pain and anger. Yuko stated that she was just a healing tool for everyone and demanded that they stop addressing her with such respect. In a fit of emotion, she accused everyone around her of indifference. Yuko's voice broke as she asked why she healed them every day, but they couldn't save her friend, Funiyama, without even bothering to provide him with food. Guilt over her inability to do more tormented her soul. Screaming in despair, Yuko fell to her knees, begging to be returned to their home world, declaring that she could not bear it any longer. After these words, Yuko lost consciousness. The maid rushed to her, panicking and screaming for help. One of the soldiers immediately ran for a field medic. Kento, seeing all this, didn't hesitate. He concentrated and used magic to stabilize Yuko. Meanwhile, the old man turned to Camellia, assuring him that they had carried out the order exactly. Camellia, remaining cold and indifferent, praised the old man for his work, asking if they were sure the task had been completed. The old man confirmed that Funiyama's corpse was left in the demon forest to be destroyed by goblins. Camellia, approving of her subordinate's work with cold indifference, ended the conversation. Meanwhile, Kento was in a state of intense anger. He declared his intention to take revenge, wanting to kill her. Reinhard tried to stop him, explaining that it was impossible now. However, Kento, overcome with rage, persistently demanded to be released and did not give in to persuasion. The old man reported that they had failed to make the target suffer and apologized for this. Camellia was indifferent, noting that the death of one macaque was not decisive. She emphasized that their main goal is to gain benefits for the kingdom of Riesenberg. Camellia added that if the target is truly dead, they should use that situation to achieve their goals. She pointed out that this death could affect many events and demanded decisiveness. Camellia also ordered that the rest of the macaques be told that they would be fed alive to the monsters if they did not obey. The guards confirmed that they were ready to carry out the order. Camellia instructed them to organize a battle in the demonic forest, noting that to intimidate the enemies, it was enough to deprive them of several limbs. She ordered them to return with a well-thought-out plan, focused on what they must do for the good of the kingdom. The guards apologized for disturbing them and left to carry out their assigned task. At this time, the maid informed Camellia that the saint was feeling ill. Camellia ordered that she be given time to rest and then return to work. However, the maid expressed concern, adding that this might be too demanding in the current situation. Camellia reminded Erna of her principle that pity should not be shown. She emphasized that slaves are merely convenient tools that should be discarded when they no longer serve a useful purpose. Erna tried to object, but Camellia abruptly interrupted her, demanding that she tell the saint that her friends would be sent to the slaughter for any whim. She added that she was wondering how many more people would be needed for the saint to improve her healing. Erna was shocked, but Camellia sternly repeated that pity for slaves was unacceptable, and the benefit of their country must come first. Erna resigned, agreed with the order. Meanwhile, Kento, full of anger at Camellia, decided to immediately go to the demonic forest to confirm something. Reinhard asked where they were going and followed him. In the forest, Kento noticed hoofprints that led in a certain direction. He noticed the abundance of blood and the piece of cloth left behind. Reinhardt noticed that the goblins had even carried off the bones, demonstrating their greed. Kento, seeing all this, could not hold back his tears. He reflected that he had disliked the man, but had never hated him. Kento noted that he had changed, becoming timid and regretting the past, saying that if he had cured him back then, perhaps things could have been different and he would have lived. Kento bowed in prayer, thinking deeply. After this, he turned to Fred, instructing him to conduct reconnaissance within the garrison. Fred briefly confirmed his readiness to carry out the order. Kento then announced that he was heading to the training field himself. Reinhard, concerned about Kento's condition, advised him to rest, but he admitted that he had planned to do so, but simply could not afford to relax now. On the training field, Kento demonstrated his new technique, explaining that he tried to create a shield out of darkness. Reinhard was surprised and noted that Kento had already achieved a high level of mastery. However, Kento himself modestly admitted that he was still only grasping the essence of the process. He explained that he could imagine a shield, but creating one required considerable effort. Recognizing how much remained to be learned, he resolutely continued training. Reinhard praised him for his rapid progress and expressed confidence that Kento would soon master magic to perfection. To this, Kento suggested that Reinhard continue training. Reinhard, however, warned that anger would not be a source of strength. Kento considered his words, acknowledging that he might have a hard time remembering that at the right moment. But he reaffirmed his intention to avenge Funayama and save his comrades. Understanding the importance of his goals, Kento decided to continue his actions, even if it meant sacrificing his rest. Kento, breathing heavily from his training, asked Reinhard how long it would take for their training to be able to deal with the Knights of Riesenberg. Reinhard replied that it was a difficult question, as Kento was barely above a novice adventurer right now. He acknowledged Kento's successes but noted that training has its limits and it's possible Kento could reach his peak and stop. Reinhard added that soldiers typically complete training in 3 years and in exceptional cases, 2. Kento reflected that blindly using anger and losing one's composure would not lead to success. He emphasized that to win, one must find Camellia's weak point. Reinhard suggested that destabilizing the country could be its weakness, but questioned the feasibility of such a plan. Kento agreed, pointing out that their knowledge of the country was limited and that drawing civilians into the conflict was undesirable. He warned that retaliatory measures could only lead to a bloodbath. Reinhard acknowledged Kento's point, noting that a direct attack on the queen could solve the problem. But he pointed out that Kento now had the opportunity to return to his home world, which complicated the situation. He later asked if Kento had ever killed a person. Kento replied that he had never done such a thing, as he had grown up in a peaceful country where such actions were completely unthinkable. Reinhard offered to take on the task of dealing with the queen if Kento didn't have such experience. However, Kento thanked him, explaining that he planned to entrust the matter to the goblins. Reinhard expressed his surprise and declared that he would return to the matter at a more opportune moment. Kento, at Amanda's house, thanked her for the food and said he was tired and planning to rest. Amanda solicitously asked him not to overexert himself. Mesa asked suspiciously what he was doing in the middle of the night. Kento tried to reassure her that nothing strange was happening. Kento admitted in his thoughts that Mace had incredible intuition. To avoid suspicion, he left a pillow in his bed instead of his own, pretending to be asleep. Meanwhile, in the Lastok camp, Yuko was carefully asking one of the girls if everything was okay and if anything was hurting. The girl assured that it was just a bruise and advised Yuko to think more about herself. Yuko readily agreed, adding that they all had to make sure they returned home alive. Watching them, Kento noted that the headman had begun to come to his senses a little, but he still remained restless. At this time, the maid praised Yuko for her efforts, but when she didn't pay attention to her, the maid couldn't bear it and burst into tears. Kento noticed that Funayama's death had significantly changed their relationship. After confirming that the class president was more or less coping, Kento decided to check on Ayako, the teacher. Ayako was in a depressed state and kept repeating her apologies, tormented by feelings of guilt. The girls tried to console her, saying that it was not her fault since she could not change anything. They claimed that it was all the others' fault and that Ayako had tried her best. However, Ayako, immersed in grief, returned to thoughts of Funayama again, repeating apologies and finding no consolation. Reinhard noted that talking to Yuko would be difficult, to which Kento agreed, confirming his words. Meanwhile, a boy in the group, full of doubt, expressed concern that they wouldn't be able to handle even the goblins and wondered if they could survive in such conditions. Yagi, remaining cool, replied that he didn't know, but reminded them that they had no choice anyway. The boy continued, suggesting that they run away, but Yagi immediately stopped him, asking what he was going to do next. The boy assumed that he could become an adventurer, since this was another world. Yagi sharply reminded them that as long as they wore the slave bracelets, it was impossible to become adventurers. He emphasized that until they freed themselves from these shackles, they would remain slaves. All that remains for them is to look for ways to survive. The boy, in despair, asked what they should do, to which Yagi, irritated, ordered him to step aside, calling him a cretin. Yagi then explained that if they were going to fight monsters, they had to become strong enough to do so. He declared that the only way was to harden their bodies, develop their skills, and never stop training. Reinhard, assessing the situation, noted that everything looked good here. Kento, observing Yagi, admitted that all this reasoning sounded suspicious coming from him. Kento, thinking, asked if there was any way to get rid of the bracelets, hinting at their common problem. Meanwhile, Camellia gave orders to hurry, emphasizing the importance of their task. Kento, watching her with Reinhard, asked about the country located west of Riesenberg. Reinhard's thinking replied that in life he had heard about the Empire of Balshania, located in the middle of the desert of Davir. He clarified that crossing this desert takes about 4 days, even for experienced trackers. Reinhard added that the desert is extremely dangerous due to sandstorms, which have claimed lives on numerous occasions. However, he noted that apparently there were no knights in these places. Kento thanked Reinhard for the information and asked his next question. Had he ever seen a map of Riesenberg in life? Reinhard confirmed his familiarity with the region's geography and inquired why Kento was asking. Kento wanted to know the difference between the current map and the old one. Reinhard paused and replied that in his time, the desert's border was much further west than it is now. This fact sparked Kento's thoughts on possible changes in the region. Kento noticed something was slowly approaching and wondered if this city had appeared recently. Reinhard replied that this place used to be a wasteland where monsters often appeared. Kento then asked whether grain crops were grown west of Riesenberg. Reinhard confirmed that there were wheat and potato fields there. Kento suggested that because of the approaching desert, people began to develop the lands to the east. Reinhard wondered if they were planning to cut down the demon forest. Kento responded that perhaps they were called in as brute force for precisely that purpose. If this is the case, then the possibility of an attack by Walzard is excluded, but you shouldn't count on their help in rescuing your classmates. Reinhard suggested that Camellia's weakness might be lurking somewhere nearby. Kento agreed, adding that they didn't yet have enough information to draw any definitive conclusions. Reinhard then said that he was awaiting further instructions. Kento turned to his companions, Reinhard, Fred, and Basten. He instructed Basten to scout out the situation in Riesenberg, to gather information about the approaching desert, the aristocracy, and the royal family. Basten assured that he was ready to penetrate even the most guarded parts of the royal castle unnoticed. Kento then turned to Fred, expressing confidence that certain shackles could be removed. He asked for a way to remove them, adding that keys might not be necessary. Fred replied that he would look into it, but noted that searching for the keys was unlikely to be successful. Kento responded that the task was too complex, but any clues would be helpful. He also asked Fred to create an accurate map of the garrison, including the location of all items. Fred assured him that he would carry out Kento's instructions and do everything possible. Kento turned to Reinhard, emphasizing that he had always been his protector and advisor. He declared that their goal was to rescue their classmates and exact revenge on Camellia for Funiyama's death, for which he needed the strength of all his comrades. In response, Fred, Basten, and Reinhard confirmed their willingness to help. During training, Kento and Reinhard continued their training. Reinhard insisted that Kento become faster and stronger, but then suggested ending the training at this point. Kento expressed a desire to continue, but Reinhard convinced him it was better to stop so as not to overexert himself. Kento agreed and thanked his mentor. Kento's stomach growled with hunger, and Reinhard reminded him that if he collapsed from exhaustion, there would be no one to save their friends. Agreeing with this, Kento said he would return for lunch and then rest. He suggested stopping by the cafe where he and Kurtz had been previously. Reinhard pointed out that Kento had criticized the quality of the food there. In response, he explained that the cafe owner had been a great help to them, and he would like to thank her. Kento also suggested that Kurtz most likely frequented the place because of Marin. Reinhard noted that the garrison guards were currently busy disposing of the ogre bodies. Kento noted that there most likely wouldn't be a line at the cafe. As they approached the cafe, shouts began to emanate. The owner loudly complained that no one understood her, no matter how hard she tried. She insisted that the food should be tailored to the customer's preferences. Kento heard the noise coming from outside the cafe and wondered what was going on. A man's voice could be heard outside the door, sharply rebuking someone, declaring that a chef's job is to serve the best dishes. He added that if his opponent couldn't understand his taste, they had nothing to discuss. Kento decided to open the door, but it suddenly swung open and he lost his balance and fell. A man leaving the cafe rudely told Kento to stay out of the way. At that moment, Marin, who had run out after the man, accidentally fell on Kento. She immediately apologized, asking if he was okay. Then Marin recognized Kento, noting that she had seen him somewhere. Kento introduced himself and reminded them that they had been here before with Kurtz. Marin remembered that they were talking about a trade caravan that had been attacked by monsters. Kento asked if the cafe was open and Marin said that they were already closing, but since he was there, he could come in. Once they were settled, Marin asked Kento if she would mind if she sat next to him. He readily agreed. Marin brought the food, apologizing for the modest offering, and offered to help themselves. Kento thanked her and wished her bon appetit. He mentally noted that the food tasted strange. The sausage was too salty, but he actually liked the bread. Marin asked him how the food was, asking for an honest answer. Kento admitted the taste was rather peculiar, but praised the bread. Marin smiled and explained that she ordered the bread from the store and did not make it herself. However, noticing Kento's reaction, she asked him not to make such a face, adding that she herself was well aware of how tasteless the rest of the food was. Kento asked Marin if she really intended to leave the cafe. Marin confirmed it, explaining that she didn't want to, but circumstances forced her to. She said the cafe was previously owned by her father, who died last fall, after which the establishment passed to his younger brother, Nicola. Nicola tries to imitate his father, but his attempts are unsuccessful. He plans to discuss with Kurtz the possibility of interning at another cafe and then reopening the establishment. However, Nicola, in her opinion, has lost the ability to distinguish tastes. He tries not to cook like his father, but because of this, he constantly has conflicts with customers, and he completely ignores Marin's own warnings. Kento thought as he listened to her story and compared Nicola's behavior with Funayama's actions, who also avoided responsibility and shifted the blame onto others. Marin noticed his confusion and asked if he was okay. Kento apologized, explaining that he was lost in thought. Marin noted that he looked like he was about to cry, but Kento assured her that everything was fine. He then changed the subject, asking if she could inherit the cafe. Marin replied that she hadn't interned at the cafe and didn't have the necessary experience. Kento suggested that she just do an internship, and Marin thought about it, agreeing that maybe she was the only one who could save the cafe. He advised her to seek help from Kurtz, believing that he could support her. Marin was initially reluctant to disturb him, but Kento assured her that Kurtz would be only too happy to help. After that, she agreed. Marin turned her attention to Kento's condition again and asked what was bothering him, as he looked too pale. Kento apologized and said he couldn't talk about it yet. He mentally reproached himself for hiding from everyone. He wanted to tell her how he felt, but he was afraid it might push Marin away. He felt he lacked the courage. Marin unexpectedly hugged him, telling him he was a wonderful person and that everything would definitely work out. She reminded him that sometimes you can rely on even a stranger in a strange city. Kento apologized again for his silence, but Marin assured him that it didn't matter and supported him with words that everything would be fine. Kento's thoughts returned to the events of the past, blaming himself for not being able to save Funayama. He felt helpless and pathetic. He finally admitted that he thought he could handle it, but he couldn't. Kento thanked Marin, noting that her support made things much easier for him. Marin asked if this was truly the case, to which Kento confidently replied that he couldn't stand still and had to move forward. Marin praised him for his fortitude but cautioned him against overexertion. Kento added that he always had someone he could turn to for advice. She also assured Kento that he could count on her help or Kurtz's support. Later, Kento returned to training. Reinhardt noted that training was over for the day, but Kento explained that he had come to consult. Reinhardt assumed the conversation was about rescuing his classmates. Kento confirmed this and explained that while he would like to train more, physical effort alone wasn't enough, as rushing could lead to further casualties. Therefore, he wanted to develop a well-thought-out rescue plan. Reinhard acknowledged his share of responsibility for what happened, as he recommended postponing the rescue of his classmates. However, he also pointed out that acting too hastily could put them in even greater danger. Kento agreed but suggested preparing everything necessary for a successful rescue in advance. He asked if they could demand Camellia release the hostages. Reinhardt expressed opposition to this plan. Kento then proposed an alternative, suggesting that kidnapping a member of the royal family could force Camellia to agree to their terms. Reinhard asked directly if Kento was willing to kill Camellia if necessary. Kento, hearing Reinhardt's question, acknowledged that much depended on the circumstances but didn't rule out the possibility that killing Camellia might be necessary. Reinhard asked another question, reminding them of their return to the previous world. Kento, after some deliberation, proposed capturing Camellia to force the Riesenberg Knights to negotiate. However, he acknowledged that her life wasn't worth 200 others and they would likely refuse such terms. Moreover, Camellia does not hesitate to kill the hostages, and their side cannot afford to kill her. He then suggested that they could take her prisoner and barricade themselves, but he immediately realized the weakness of such a plan. Reinhardt again expressed disagreement, reminding them that their ultimate goal was to return to the old world. Even if they managed to learn a way back from Camellia, it could take a long time. While they're strengthening their base, the enemy could kidnap someone else, complicating the situation. Reinhardt also noted that the teachers had already been taken to another location they knew nothing about. Kento realized that their small squad of 4 people was not capable of saving 200 hostages. Reinhard confirmed this and added that Lastok serves as an important outpost for containing monsters. He emphasized that even at night there are many patrols there, making an undetected escape impossible. Kento realized that their discovery was inevitable, and the enemy would certainly try to stop them. He expressed hope of avoiding battle, but Reinhard pointed out that protecting 1 or 2 men would not be difficult, but protecting 200 while avoiding combat was extremely difficult. Kento asked if this meant killing the knights, and Reinhard confirmed it. Kento then asked if it was possible to do without killing, without endangering his classmates. Reinhard acknowledged the difficulty of such a request and asked why Kento was so concerned about the lives of his enemies. Kento admitted that he didn't care what happened to the knights, but he was concerned about who would defend the city if they died. Reinhard agreed, noting that without guards the city could be overrun by monsters. Kento clarified that he had no sympathy for the knights who were simply following Camelia's orders, but he did not want to endanger the common people. Reinhard praised him for such reflection and asked if Kento had ever hunted foxes. Kento replied that he never had. Reinhard explained that foxes could be flushed out of their holes by directing smoke through air magic. This gave Kento the idea to use a similar tactic in the battle in the Demon Forest. He assumed the knights wouldn't even need to be lured out, as they were coming there to train on their own. Since the enemy believed Kento dead, their primary focus would be preventing the students from escaping. When Reinhard asked what they would do, Kento asked if the knights were concerned about anyone trying to rescue the students. Reinhard assumed the knights were only concerned about making sure no one escaped. Kento added that even if the students managed to escape into the forest, nothing good would await them. Furthermore, the affinity bracelets would force them to return. Reinhardt pointed out that there was likely a limit on the number of knights participating in training. Kento suggested that they could neutralize these knights without killing them. Reinhardt agreed but warned that if anyone noticed their actions, the remaining knights would not ignore it. Kento noted that the operation must be carried out without anyone noticing. Reinhardt reminded them that the students' disappearance would inevitably arouse suspicion and point to outside help. Kento, realizing the difficulty of the situation, expressed disappointment and admitted that the task was becoming increasingly difficult. Reinhard reminded Kento that even after rescuing the students, they needed to prepare everything for their return through the Demon Forest. He noted that even if they acted quickly, it would take at least 3 days to gather water, food, and tents. Kento agreed, admitting that when he was alone, he could rely entirely on Reinhard. But with so many people, preparation becomes essential. He acknowledged the truth of Reinhard's words. Reinhard tried to calm Kento down, noticing that he was getting too worked up. However, Kento admitted that he couldn't just sit back and live peacefully knowing that his classmates were in trouble. Reinhard countered, pointing out that Kento wasn't idle. He recalled how Kento helped in the garden in the warehouse, participated in construction, and learned to fight. He added that he knew better than anyone how Kento trained until late at night and assured him he had nothing to be ashamed of. Kento, however, was once again overcome with guilt for failing to save Funyama. Reinhard tried to support him, calling him talented, but warned him that expecting perfect outcomes in everything was arrogant. He reminded him that Kento wasn't a god and not everything in life would go according to plan. Kento objected, saying that he couldn't pass by someone who needed help. In response, Reinhard reminded him of one of the guild's commandments: if the enemy caught you off guard, it only plays into his hands. Kento recalled a recent incident with an enemy he jokingly called the guy with the monkey face. Reinhard noted that Kento hadn't been prepared for this turn of events. Had the situation been different, he would have handled it. Reflecting on Reinhard's words, Kento realized that knowledge, experience, and training were necessary for success. Reinhard confirmed that this is the key to success. Kento stated his top priority: rescuing his classmates safe and sound. He proposed using the knight's field training to accomplish this, emphasizing the need to act without being discovered. He also emphasized the need to be prepared for an unfavorable outcome. Reinhard supported his sentiment and assured him that he would not allow him to shirk his preparation. When Kento asked where to get provisions and tents, Reinhard suggested simply stealing them from the knights themselves. Kento appreciated this plan and agreed with it. Reinhard explained that the knights' outpost would certainly have everything they needed. He suggested getting Fred involved in this matter, noting that the knights already often sold their supplies on the side, so the loss of things would most likely not be noticed. Kento asked about the number of knights participating in field training. Reinhard estimated that there could be around 25 of them, based on the training methods of his lifetime. He explained that knights typically worked in groups: a group of 5, a flight of 25, a squad of 125, and a squad of 825. Kento clarified what would happen if the knights sent only 5 men. Reinhard assumed this would be done to check if they were in danger. When Kento asked about the number of commanders, Reinhard replied that there would most likely be 5, one for each group. He suggested building a plan around that assumption, but also stressed the need to have a backup plan in case things go wrong. When Kento asked if they would have time to prepare, Reinhard assured them that they would do their best. Kento assured Reinhard that he would channel all the feelings accumulated within him into strength to achieve his goal. Reinhard reassured him that they would definitely save his friends. The next day, Kento arrived at the guild, observing what was happening. He noticed that some of the participants were once again in the middle of a bit of chaos, and mentally noted that this could also be considered a kind of training. After greeting everyone, he greeted everyone with a good morning. Mule responded warmly, greeting Kento, and Manon asked how he was feeling. Kento assured her that everything was fine. But Mule hugged him, asking if he was really feeling better and offering to show him if he was in pain. A fleeting feeling of admiration for her embrace crossed Kento's mind. Jillik intervened, reminding them that classes were in session, and ordered Mule to step aside. Mule snapped back that she was simply returning a favor and didn't need permission. Manon, watching the scene, silently noted how painful it was to watch. Jillik was outraged, saying that Mule had no reason to do so. She demanded they stop arguing early in the morning. Jillik chuckled and replied that he wasn't arguing at all, but simply teaching the brat some manners. At that moment, Donovan approached, greeting everyone and remarking on their cheerfulness this morning. Kento returned his good morning. Donovan informed Kento that training was waiting for him, but Kento quietly told him that they needed to talk. In private, Kento told Donovan about his classmate's death. Donovan reacted with fury, indignant at how Camellia could have allowed such a thing. Kento quietly confirmed his words, expressing his pain. Kento continued his discussion with Donovan about Camellia and the plan to rescue his classmates during the field training. Donovan approved of his idea to take advantage of the enemy's training and specified when Kento planned to act. Kento admitted that there is no exact date yet, as he needs to prepare thoroughly. Donovan agreed, noting the importance of preparation, and suggested deploying the garrison. He promised that the guards would enter the city at the same time as the operation began, creating a diversionary tactic. Kento expressed gratitude for such assistance. Later, Kento approached Manon, apologizing for the wait. She asked how his conversation with Donovan had gone. Kento replied that everything had gone well, but Donovan scolded him for not paying attention to his health. Manon remarked that Kento was acting too recklessly, pointing out his morning actions. Kento tried to object, saying that all of this was necessary for effective training. Manon, however, reminded him that he was expressing this opinion alone. Kento was surprised, but Manon continued, explaining that Jillik was a very powerful fighter. She noted that Jillik had permission to enter dungeons alone, as well as the ability to increase his stats fivefold. Moreover, he was older and more experienced, so in her opinion, Kento had no chance against him. Kento countered, reminding her that he had once defeated Jillik. Manon praised him for this achievement, adding that he was amazing even if Jillik was simply distracted. This praise took Kento by surprise, and he mentally noted that this was the first time a girl had praised him like that. Manon called out to him several times, bringing him out of his reverie. Kento, slightly embarrassed, offered to get to work, but Manon noted that there was little they could do to help at the moment. Kento admitted that, caught up in his conversation with Donovan, he had missed the details of the current task, and now he and Manon were left overboard. Manon offered to talk, but Kento didn't immediately hear her words and asked again. Manon, embarrassed, said nothing. As an apology for his inattention, Kento invited Manon to lunch. They went to the cafe she chose. At the cafe, they were met by a girl named Inoue, who greeted Manon and was surprised to notice that she had come with a friend. Manon, slightly embarrassed, confirmed this. Inoue looked at Kento with interest and greeted him by name. Kento introduced himself and said he was pleased to meet her. Inoue brought the order, which included salted meat and fresh cream paste, and wished them luck, drawing out her words slightly. Kento quickly ate his portion, thanking him for the food. Manon was surprised by his speed, asking if he'd even had time to chew. Kento assured him he had, adding that the food was delicious. Manon asked Kento to wait a little while she finished eating, but he advised her not to rush. Watching Manon eat, Kento thought that she did it in a very funny way, carefully placing tiny pieces into her mouth. At the same time, he noticed that Inoue was looking at them with some interest, which caused him slight confusion. After dinner, Manon suggested climbing the city wall. Kento asked in surprise if this could be done. Manon explained that climbing was allowed unless there were special restrictions, which surprised Kento a little, as he hadn't known about it before. Manon noted with regret that the stone ogre's body had already been removed, as she had wanted to see it. She asked Kento if he had seen any ogres. Kento replied that he had seen it, but from afar. Manon joked that otherwise he would likely have become monster food. Kento asked Manon why she decided to become an adventurer. She explained that she was inspired to do this by her father, who was a prominent adventurer but died 3 years ago. Kento assumed he was killed by monsters, but Manon revealed it was due to decomposition. Kento asked what she meant, and Manon explained that her father had first developed a stomach ache, and then the illness had spread throughout his body, leading to his death. Kento mentally compared this to appendicitis, which in his world was no longer a fatal disease, but in this world, everything was different. Manon said that the doctors in their town were unable to cope with the disease, and although they said that there were good specialists in Buckenheim, they were unable to save her father. She admitted that thanks to the money her father earned, she was able to continue living. Wanting to follow in his footsteps, she decided to become an adventurer. Manon noted that her water attribute makes her a valuable member of the group. She said that she would be able to provide everyone with water in the dungeons, and if she mastered healing spells, she would be able to heal her comrades. Kento agreed that her abilities were indeed important, as her weight made it difficult to carry a large supply of water. Manon added that the water would also be useful for cooking, and then, embarrassed, suggested that Kento join her in a group. Kento admitted he'd never considered it and explained that now wasn't the right time. However, he promised to contact Manon when necessary. Manon was delighted by his words and asked him to remember the promise, emphasizing its importance. Kento confirmed that he did and assured him he wouldn't forget it. Manon, reminding Kento of her promise, once again emphasized its importance. Kento, slightly embarrassed, confirmed that he remembered. Then Manon suggested that they look into the gun store. Kento mentally noted that this was not quite an ordinary place for a date and wondered if Manon wanted to buy a new weapon. Their conversation was interrupted by Marin calling Kento. She thanked him for his advice yesterday and said that, as he recommended, she had spoken to Kurtz. When Kento asked what Kurtz had said, Marin replied that he had advised her to do as she wished, promising to support her no matter what. Kento suggested that Marin would still continue her father's work. She confirmed this, noting that it would be a shame to close the cafe, but at the same time expressed concern about where she could get an internship. Kento suggested contacting Amanda, from whom he rents an apartment. Marin doubted that she would be accepted even if she offered to work for free. Kento explained that Amanda was always busy with clients and short on workers, so perhaps she would agree. He promised to ask her. Hearing this, Marin hugged Kento in gratitude, delighting him. He mentally noted with joy that he finally received Marin's embrace. At this point, Kento noticed Manon's gaze, who apparently felt like she was out of place in this situation. Marin suggested that now would be a good time to go, as Amanda was probably getting ready for the evening reception. Kento agreed, suggesting they leave right away. After saying a restrained goodbye, Manon wished them well and left, leaving Kento with Marin. Kento, noticing Manon leaving, tried to stop her, calling her name. Marin, noticing this, apologized, suggesting she might have angered Manon. Kento took the blame, promising to apologize to Manon later. Marin tried to reassure him, noting that he had done nothing wrong. However, Kento admitted that it was simply male nature and he couldn't act differently. They went to see Amanda. Amanda readily accepted Marin as her assistant, noting that she needed the help. Marin expressed her deep gratitude. During the conversation, Kento mentioned that Nicola probably wanted to become an adventurer. Amanda took this calmly, saying that Nicola could do whatever she wanted and that it might help Mesa learn something. She encouraged Mesa to try harder. Mesa, clearly displeased, declared that the cafe would be hers anyway, so there was no need for her to learn anything. Amanda sternly pointed out that running a cafe wasn't as easy as it seemed and that it couldn't be done without knowledge. After being persuaded, Mesa reluctantly agreed. Later, she declared that she hated arithmetic and complained about how difficult it was for her to solve such problems. Mesa turned to Kento with reproach, calling him a cheater for making it look easy. Kento laughed and remarked that if such simple tasks were difficult for her, it meant she still had a lot to learn. Mesa replied that she didn't want to hear it from him. Amanda intervened, reminding Mesa that without the ability to count, she wouldn't be able to sell or manage the cafe. Mesa reluctantly agreed, but continued to complain. Amanda, addressing Kento, remarked that she was surprised by his good arithmetic skills. Mesa immediately echoed her sentiments, emphasizing that this was truly unusual. Kento jokingly remarked that since even he could handle arithmetic, Amanda was probably worried about her daughter's future. Amanda confirmed this but added that now that she has help from Marin, she will be able to spend more time raising Mesa. Mesa, angered by Kento's remark, exclaimed in irritation. Marin quickly calmed her down by offering her a watermelon. Hearing this, Mesa immediately perked up and enthusiastically accepted. Kento also decided to try the watermelon and noted that it smelled like citrus, but the taste was completely different. He was surprised by the discrepancy between appearance and taste, realizing that this was another peculiarity of this world. Later, while in his room, Kento was thinking about his desire to talk to Ayako-sensei. He admitted that under the current circumstances, this was impossible, as everyone would assume he was dead. He also didn't want the village headman to suffer because of him again. However, Kento knew he needed to talk to her so she could keep her cool at the crucial moment. Reinhard agreed with his thoughts, and Kento decided that they should go to Lastok for this meeting. In Lastok, the maid announced that a bath was ready for Mrs. Saint. Reinhard, noticing this, said this was their chance, but Kento refused to take such a course of action. The maid suggested they take a rest. Yuko approached her, saying she wanted to talk to her. Erna agreed and followed Yuko. Reinhard reminded Kento of the possibility of action, but he could hardly contain himself, whispering that they were simply spying. Suddenly, Kento's nose started bleeding. Reinhard became concerned and suggested treatment, but Kento assured him that he could handle it himself. Meanwhile, Yuko began a conversation with Erna, asking her if she was happy with the current situation. She noted that to Erna, the students from another world might be just a group of kids, but she tried to find out if Erna truly believed things should remain as they were. Erna confidently stated that she did not at all consider the students from the other world to be just a group of children. Yuko, shocked by her words, asked why she continued to listen to Camellia then. Erna explained that she alone was not able to change anything, and besides, Camellia was doing everything for the residents of Lastok, trying her best. Yuko was perplexed, asking why Erna continued to trust Camellia. Erna replied that it wasn't just faith but trust based on Camellia's past achievements. She began telling a story from 3 years ago. Then in Lastok, bandits blocked the roads, demanding money from residents for passage, despite the fact that the roads were intended for public use. They responded aggressively to the residents' complaints, threatening them until Camellia intervened, introducing herself as the third princess and ruler of Lastok and the kingdom of Riesenberg. Camellia ordered the arrest of the robbers, accusing them of illegally profiting from people. One of the bandits tried to resist, but Camellia, threatening him with a dagger, put him in his place, asking if he would prefer to die. In fear, the bandits submitted. Camellia ordered the confiscation of all their property and their expulsion from the kingdom. After this, a child approached Camellia, expressing his gratitude. Camellia responded kindly, saying that now he could live in peace. Erna added that all victims were then paid compensation, and the city held a celebration with dancing. Since then, she says, Lastok has changed a lot thanks to Camellia's efforts. Yuko, hearing this story, expressed disbelief and asked if Erna was sure it was all true. Erna firmly assured her that no one would lie in such a situation and that everything had happened exactly as she described it. Yuko expressed her confusion, noting that, from their perspective, it was difficult to perceive Camellia as a normal person. Erna agreed, adding that even her comrades were increasingly less understanding of her actions. Yuko thought for a moment and asked Erna a question: who were they really fighting against, monsters or people? Erna admitted that Camellia hadn't told her this. She believed the student's call was connected to the need to clear the Devil's Forest to expand Lastok's territory. Erna explained that the people of Lastok simply lacked the strength to deal with the monsters on their own. Yuko countered, suggesting that Camellia could bolster its ranks with nobility or royalty. Erna noted that this was unlikely, since even the creation of the current army was very difficult for Camellia. She explained that in the kingdom of Riesenberg, there was a struggle for the throne between the first and second princes. The nobility was divided, some supported the first prince, others the second. Camellia has chosen the side of the first prince, but Lastok is in the second prince's territory, which significantly complicates the situation. Yuko was outraged that such an important matter as expanding territory and containing monsters had not become a shared responsibility for the entire state. She emphasized that it was wrong to drag them, mere students, into political squabbles. Erna agreed, but admitted that she had nothing to say in response. Yuko offered Erna cooperation. She also asked for help in convincing Camellia to allow her to heal others. Erna noted that she had already tried to talk about this, but without success. Yuko also asked to at least improve the food and conditions for students. She emphasized that without rest, treatment, and adequate nutrition, these workouts will not produce any results. Erna agreed, saying that she would try to present the request as her own, because Camellia would most likely refuse if she found out it was Yuko's initiative. Yuko thanked Erna and apologized for another request, to which Erna agreed to listen to her. Yuko asked Erna to call her simply Yuko, expressing her desire for Erna to see her as an equal human being and not as an instrument in the image of a saint. Erna agreed and called her by name, for which Yuko thanked her. Kento, watching their conversation, quietly noted how well everything was going. Erna said that it was time for her to go to Camellia with a report, and promised to immediately try to discuss Yuko's request with her. She did warn that it might not work right away, but she would do her best. Yuko expressed gratitude for her efforts. Reinhard pointed out to Kento that now was the perfect time to act. Kento agreed and instructed Fred to monitor Erna and Camellia's conversation. Fred immediately set out to carry out the task. Kento then turned to Yuko, repeating the word class representative to get her attention. Yuko, hearing the voice, became scared and began to look for where it was coming from. She demanded an explanation of who was speaking and where he was. Kento hastened to reassure her, stating that he was not a ghost or anything like that. Yuko, gradually realizing who was in front of her, said his name in surprise, Kokubu. Kento apologized for scaring her, explaining that he used darkness magic to escape. Yuko, realizing it was indeed Kento standing before her, rushed to embrace him. She couldn't hold back tears of joy, repeating how happy she was that he was alive. Yuko expressed her joy that Kento was okay, and admitted that she was happy to know he was alive despite Camellia's words about his death. Camellia claimed that Kento could not be saved, and that he was allegedly eaten by monsters. Kento told Yuko that he now possesses dark magic, which allows him to move through the shadows of this world. Yuko invited him to talk on the spot, but Kento warned her that she might catch a cold and offered to put something on. She agreed and carefully wrapped him up along with herself. This confused Kento, who noted how close she was. Yuko, feeling Kento's warmth, admitted that she sometimes felt lonely. She noted that his classmates can communicate with each other at any time, but she can only do this when she is healing. Then Yuko asked how he managed to escape. Kento revealed that during the goblin attack, he unknowingly used dark magic and summoned skeletons to protect him. Yuko asked him to tell her what happened next, and Kento agreed to share his story in order. Yuko later learned that Kento also possessed light magic. She thanked him for protecting them from the shadows and said he didn't need to apologize for the job he'd given her. Yuko praised Kento, noting his incredible efforts and preparation, which allowed him to infiltrate Lastok alone. Kento modestly replied that he had the support of Reinhard and the others. Yuko, still feeling guilty, said that if she'd been more proficient in magic, she might have been able to save Funayama. Kento reassured her, noting that it wasn't her fault as he himself hadn't been able to do anything either. However, he firmly stated that ultimately Camellia was to blame. He then shared his plan to take advantage of the field training in the Devil's Forest to free his classmates. Kento noted that the fact that everyone thought he was dead played into his hands. Yuko agreed that Camellia and her supporters believed Kento to be dead. He then asked when field training would begin. Yuko, after a moment's thought, asked what she should do in the meantime. Kento advised her to continue healing people and seek out allies like Erna, who was already trying to improve conditions for the students. Yuko agreed and added that she sometimes even healed knights, so she would try to find allies among them as well. Kento warned her against overexerting herself, noting that if she became exhausted, the situation would only get worse. Yuko hugged Kento in gratitude and promised to wait for his return when he came to save them. Kento, a little embarrassed, suggested testing one idea. He activated a dark shield that he could pass through himself and wanted to see if Yuko could pass through it. Yuko tried, but she encountered an invisible barrier, as if there was a wall in front of her. Even when they held hands, nothing changed, and Kento admitted that this method wouldn't work to save the others. Yuko wondered why she couldn't get in. Kento suggested it had something to do with her light attribute. Yuko agreed that light could repel darkness, but Kento pointed out that he himself wielded light magic, which raised questions about the nature of that magic. Fred interrupted their thoughts by informing them that Erna was returning. Kento told Yuko that it was time for him to leave, but assured her that he would contact her again. Yuko promised to wait. After this, Kento approached Fred to find out how things were going. Fred reported to Kento that the situation with Camellia remained unchanged. She did not listen to anyone, despite all the efforts of Erna, who tried as best she could. Later, Kento asked Reinhard if this kind of thing often happened during a succession battle. Reinhard explained that if there were multiple heirs, such situations were not uncommon. Kento suggested that this was the same reason no one was taking action against the approaching desert. Reinhardt confirmed this was entirely possible and suggested waiting for information from Baston, who was monitoring the situation in the capital. Kento wondered if Camellia would take advantage of the negotiations between the first and second princes to her advantage. Reinhard noted that this was impossible to predict, but mentioned the royal family's secret technique, repatriation. If they could find even the slightest clue, they could gain valuable information. Kento agreed with the importance of collecting data. Reinhard suggested Kento go to the capital to see the situation for himself. Kento, lost in thought, asked if they would be able to move freely with Baston's help. Having received an affirmative answer, he decided to go there the next day. The next morning, Kento woke up, yawned, and greeted everyone with a good morning. However, his attempt to enter somewhere was interrupted by Maka, who categorically stated that entry was prohibited. Kento asked her in confusion what she meant, but Mesa stubbornly repeated the prohibition, insisting that he leave. Caving in to her pressure, Kento reluctantly agreed and retreated. Kento greeted Amanda with a good morning, to which she replied that breakfast would be ready soon. He asked what happened to Mesa, as she was acting strangely. Amanda explained that Mesa simply didn't want Kento to see her futon, which apparently had been damaged. Mesa, hearing this, became indignant and exclaimed that she had asked to keep it a secret. Amanda, however, calmly replied that at her age there could be no secrets. In response, Kento jokingly suggested banning Mace from using Jibra. Amanda echoed the idea, asking if that was a good idea. Mesa immediately began to protest, begging him not to take the jib from her. Kento teased her, saying he could continue using it himself since but before he could finish, an indignant Mesa called him a jerk and hit him. Amanda intervened, warning Mesa not to hit the corner. Mesa chuckled and declared that she would repay Kento someday. Kento grinned and reminded her that she already had. Later, Kento, with dark circles under his eyes, asked Reinhardt to point out Baston's location. Reinhardt immediately complied, and soon Kento found himself in a new location. He asked in surprise where they were. Baston replied that it was the capital of Riesenberg Ardels. He noted that the journey here by horse would have taken at least a week, but thanks to their ability, they arrived here in an instant. Kento, looking around the capital, was amazed by the number of people. Baston advised them to look at the city from above, noting that usually only the royal family had such access, but thanks to Kento, they were able to get here too. Kento, looking at the capital, expressed admiration for its scale. He noted that the city is 4 or even 5 times larger than Walzard. Then, turning his attention to the fields surrounding the city, he assumed that the capital's territory was 10 times larger than the size of Walzard. Baston added that thanks to purification techniques, the water in the capital remains crystal clear. Kento noted that the capital was truly impressive and expressed his desire to see the royal family. Baston, somewhat embarrassed, asked if Kento was sure of his intentions. When Kento asked what had happened, Baston finally agreed to accompany him. Reinhardt, noticing the king, was amazed that he was indeed the ruler of Riesenberg. Baston confirmed that he was the king. Kento sarcastically remarked that with such a king, Riesenberg was doomed. Reinhardt and Fred, hearing this, involuntarily remained silent. Kento continued, expressing his bewilderment at how such a man could become Camelia's father. In his opinion, the king most likely delegates his duties to the chancellor, while he himself simply amuses himself in the bath or in bed. He concluded that under such a ruler, the struggle for the throne would resemble smoldering embers rather than a blazing fire. Baston explained to Kento that what he was asking was practically impossible. When Kento asked if the first and second princes were the same as their father, Baston replied that they were not, but still offered to show them. Kento agreed. They approached the place where the 2 men were. Baston pointed to one of them, introducing him as the first prince, Alphonse. Kento was surprised to see that Alphonse looked nothing like his father and asked which one was the other. Baston pointed to the nearest knight protector, Magdalos, who was just talking to Alphonse. Magdalos warned the prince that he was making a bad move. Alphonse asked him with slight indifference what he thought about it. Magdalos advised Alphonse to show at least a little interest in tactics. But the prince only noticed that Magdalos was next to him, and there was no reason to worry. To this, Magdalos replied that he could die in the event of war. Alphonse, smiling, assured him that he would follow him without a second thought if that happened. Magdalos, indignant, asked the prince not to say such things, but Alphonse, in his usual manner, waved him off, adding that he talked too much and offered to help him shut up. Kento, observing their interaction, sarcastically remarked that love can take many forms. Reinhardt, responding reservedly, noted that such manifestations were too early in the morning to see. Kento, distracted by what he'd seen, asked where the second prince was. Baston agreed to show him and led them on. Approaching another group of people, they spotted 2 men. Kento, looking around, asked Baston which of them was the second prince. Baston pointed to a man with a redder shade of hair, introducing him as the second Prince Bernst. The one with the green hair turned out to be the third prince, Christoph. Kento noted that they looked very similar. Baston explained that both princes were the sons of the second queen, Terentia. Camelia and the fourth prince, Diathelm, were, in turn, the children of the third queen. Kento nodded, trying to make sense of all the connections. Baston added that the first and second queens also had daughters, but they were already married. When Kento asked about Cilia, the mother of the maid assigned to Takayama, Baston replied that due to her low birth, she was not recognized as queen. Cilia now serves the first queen. Kento was surprised at how complex everything was, to which Baston admitted that it had been difficult for him to gather all this information. At this time, the man approached the princes, informing them that the preparations were complete. Bernst clarified that the man sentenced to death was indeed a criminal and a murderer. The man confirmed this. Bernst said with a grin that he would personally punish him. Kento was shocked to see a human being used as a target for training. Bernst, with obvious pleasure, fired and hit the condemned man in the leg, declaring that he must know the gravity of his sin. A man watching the scene praised Bernst for his accuracy. Bernst mockingly handed the turn to Christophe, suggesting that the criminal consider it an honor. Christophe decided to make the task more difficult by encouraging the victim to kick and beg for mercy, but immediately clarified that the criminal did not deserve it. Bernst reminded him not to hit vital organs so the man wouldn't die too quickly. Christophe assured that he knew what he was doing and shot into the palm. The man next to him praised him for his accuracy. Christophe proudly challenged Bernst to repeat his shot. Bernst, smiling, declared that he could easily hit the heart. Christophe reminded him of his own warning, but Bernst, losing interest, declared that he was bored. Kento, watching what was happening, was shocked and expressed his disgust. Turning to the man, Bernst ordered him to come up with something more interesting. Reyes confirmed that he would carry out his instructions. Kento admitted that he had hoped to come to an agreement with one of the members of the royal family, but realized that it was a vain hope. Baston mentioned the fourth prince, Camelia's younger brother, but added that he was in poor health and bedridden. Kento asked Baston to continue the search, and he confirmed that he would do so. Kento bitterly noted that the first and second princes had exceeded his worst expectations. He wondered if all their effort in acquiring this knowledge had been worth it. Reinhard, seeing his mood, suggested they take a stroll around the city to assess the situation. Kento agreed, deciding to look around. Reinhard noticed that something was wrong with Kento and asked if he had lost his appetite. Kento shared his thoughts that since coming to this world he had seen people being killed by monsters, but killing for fun, committed by people themselves, seemed to him to be the true manifestation of monstrosity. He called such people real monsters. Reinhard noted that there were many such individuals in the royal family. Suddenly they heard a sound and noticed a poster that said Nene Acrobat. Reinhard explained that she was an artist entertaining ordinary people and trying to attract the attention of those connected with the theater. Kento suggested that if she was noticed, she could become popular and advance her career. Reinhard confirmed that those who master any magical element have a guaranteed chance to take a place on stage. People gathered to watch the performance. Kento was surprised to see Nene bend her leg so that it was near her head, and wondered if she was in danger of damaging her spine. At this time, a man approached Nene and rudely asked who allowed her to work there. Nene was indignant, stating that she had already paid the tax. The man asked incredulously how she could prove it. Irritated by his words, she noted that he had arrived at the wrong time and was only bothering her. Then Nene showed him the document, claiming that everything had been paid fairly. The man doubted it and rudely accused her of it being a fake, suggesting that she was trying to deceive them. Nene was indignant, claiming that the signature on the document belonged to a man who called himself Raijin. The man, in turn, noted that the signature hadn't been made in their office and therefore was invalid. He stated that if Nene wanted to continue performing, she would have to come to the office in person and sort everything out. Nene was upset about having to pay again. The man suggested they continue the conversation in the office. Reinhardt pointed out to Kento that the people who stopped Nene looked suspicious. Kento, on the contrary, assumed they were making perfectly reasonable statements. However, Reinhardt explained that this was a typical ploy to distract and confuse the victim. Nene, following the men, asked where they were taking her. They reassured her, saying they were almost there. One of the men addressed the stranger, calling him brother, and said that they had brought Nene. The stranger, who introduced himself as the real Raijin, stated that if Nene continued to work without official permission, it would create problems for them. Nene responded by presenting a document, explaining that she had honestly paid the tax. Raijin glanced at the paper and, with feigned regret, announced that it was a forgery. Nene was stunned and asked if it was true. Raijin confirmed and showed a sample of the actual permit, emphasizing the difference. Nene realized with confusion that she would actually have to pay again. Raijin, feigning sympathy, offered to reduce the amount to a third, noting that he understood her skills and efforts. Nene agreed with relief, expressing joy that she would not have to pay the full amount. Raijin handed her the document and indicated where to sign. Nene quickly agreed without checking the contents. Reinhard, observing this, noted that the situation was suspicious, as signing documents without reading them was extremely risky. Kento, too, began to doubt whether everything was all right. After Nene signed, Raijin announced the sum of 1,500,000 berg. A stunned Nene asked where such a huge sum came from, since they were only talking about 500. Raijin, not hiding his grin, began to explain that the situation was now completely different. Raijin showed the document and, with a grin, pointed to the fine print, which stated that speaking without permission would result in a fine of 1 million. Nene was outraged, calling it unfair, since such important information was written in tiny letters. Raijin just grinned and offered Nene to pay with his body. She recoiled in horror, but he grabbed her, demanding that she not resist. Kento, observing the situation, turned to Reinhard, asking if Nene was really wearing the submission bracelet. Reinhard confirmed this and explained that the bracelet was activated by the command "Do not resist," forcing the wearer to obey orders without question. Kento was surprised how Raijin ended up with such an item, since only the royal family was supposed to have permission to use the bracelets. Reinhard agreed and suggested that the royal family was allowing them to be spread more widely than they should be. Raijin happily noted that Nene was an excellent product that could fetch a lot of money. Nene, realizing she'd been deceived, declared she was renouncing the contract. However, Raijin, smirking, reminded her that the document with her signature made resistance futile. He added admonishingly that one should read documents carefully before signing them. Kento ordered Reinhard to deal with Raijin's henchmen. Reinhard immediately appeared behind the men. The men, oblivious to what was happening, continued to mock Nene until they suddenly noticed the skeleton. Raijin cried out in fear, demanding an explanation as to where the skeleton came from. He began to frantically search for a piece of paper to defend his claims. Kento helped Nene get rid of the subjugation bracelet. Once freed, she asked in surprise who he was and noted that the bracelet was no longer on her. Raijin, realizing that the situation had gotten out of control, turned to Kento, demanding an explanation of who he was. Kento introduced himself in a reserved manner as a passing mage who noticed that Raijin was deceiving people using unpleasant methods. Raijin tried to justify himself by mentioning that he had a contract, but suddenly discovered that the document was missing. In a panic, he accused Kento of theft. Kento calmly asked if Raijin had any proof of his claims. Raijin, realizing that he was trapped, began to threaten. Kento calmly reminded him that he had already defeated him with just a wooden sword. He threatened to use a real one if necessary. A frightened Raijin quickly changed his tone and offered money in exchange for his safety. He started with 500,000 berg, then raised the amount to 1 million. Kento, however, was skeptical, noting that anyone could promise anything. Raijin confidently stated that the money was in his safe. Kento gave the command to Reinhard, ordering him to knock out Raijin, which he immediately did. Nene, having recovered from the shock, thanked Kento for saving her. Kento waved it off, explaining that he had simply happened to be nearby and noticed that Raijin and his company had immediately struck him as suspicious. Nene asked what to do with the captives now. Kento paused, noting that they clearly had connections which could complicate the situation. Nene complained that it would be difficult for her to continue her performances if she attracted the attention of people like Raijin and his company. Kento, in order to calm her down, used dark magic, opened the safe and took out the money from there. Surprised, Nene asked what he had just done. Kento explained that it was dark magic and offered to let her take some of the money to rest a bit and wait it out. Nene, seeing that there was a whole million in front of her, doubted, thinking that such a sum looked suspicious. Kento offered to take only a third of the amount, that is, 300,000 berg, explaining that this could be considered compensation for the inconvenience caused to her. He left a note on the safe door stating that he had taken the money as compensation for the inconvenience, signing his name as magician. Later, Nene still expressed doubts about whether it was okay to take the money and leave. Kento confidently replied that this could be considered a reward for clearing out the bandits' lair. Nene, reassured by his words, agreed with this interpretation and even invited Kento to team up with her. She noted that with his magic, he could become a celebrity. However, Kento refused, adding that it would be better for her to temporarily stay out of public view and wait it out. In gratitude, Nene hugged Kento, expressing regret that he couldn't help her, but sincerely thanking him for everything. Reinhard, watching what was happening, noticed that Kento's mood had noticeably improved. Kento agreed, noting that they had neutralized the bandits and could now continue exploring the city. Fred came up with important news, announcing that the training would begin tomorrow. Kento was stunned to learn that the training would begin so soon. he asked Fred to explain the details at the training grounds. On the spot, Fred reported that Camellia had reacted to Funayama's death more harshly than expected. After this event, she had intensified her harassment of the students, and her knights had also come under increasing pressure. Kento asked how many people would be participating in the exercise. Fred replied that there would be 5, 3 of whom were commanders. Kento assumed they wanted to put on a show. Fred added that among the enemies there is one of their people, a coachman, who will take the participants to the forest and then return to the outpost. Reinhard noted that it was important to consider what the commanders were planning. Kento clarified what he meant. Reinhard doubted the commanders would risk fighting dangerous monsters. Instead, a couple of knights would likely handle a small group of goblins. Kento wondered if the commanders would intervene if the students were in real danger. Fred immediately dismissed this hope, emphasizing that the knights most likely wouldn't care if 2 or 3 of the boys died. He explained that the true purpose of the exercises was to demonstrate the danger of the monsters and convey it to those who remained at the outpost. The survival of all participants is not required. Just a few people who can return and confirm the horrors of the forest are enough. Kento was furious to realize that humans were of no value to his enemies. He expressed his indignation, calling it a mockery. Reinhard confirmed that the knights would not go deep into the forest and suggested that Fred and Bastian would be able to deal with them. Kento was concerned about what to do with the knights after the capture. If they are released, the existence of Kento and his team will be revealed. However, given the design of the obedience bracelets, they won't be usable either. Lost in thought, Kento muttered that they needed to find a solution on what to do next. Reinhard offered to release the knights if they didn't learn of Kento and his crew's existence. Otherwise, he proposed taking them prisoner. Kento asked where they could be kept. Reinhard explained that if the knights agreed to cooperate, they could be sent to Valzard. Otherwise, they would have to be left in the forest and housed in tents. He also reminded Kento to contact Donovan. Kento agreed and went to the guild building. As he entered, he noticed the large number of people and assumed that everyone had returned to carry out their orders. Meanwhile, Donovan was surrounded by people who constantly turned to him. Kento noted that Donovan seemed very busy and decided not to distract him. Instead, he wondered where Klaus was. Finding Klaus, Kento approached him. Klaus greeted him and mentioned that he had heard about how Kento had managed to outwit his enemies. Kento confirmed and said that he had arrived at the guild because there was field training scheduled for tomorrow. Klaus was surprised, noting that it was sooner than he expected. Kento explained that recent events had exacerbated the situation. Klaus concluded that the enemy most likely wanted to make an example of the students they considered rebels. He assured Kento that he would do everything possible and advised him to proceed as he saw fit. Klaus reminded Kento that he was free to move around and suggested that he report everything to Donovan during the mission. Kento expressed doubt, noting that Donovan was already too busy. Klaus recommended contacting him late in the evening when the guild was closed and the workers had left. Kento, surprised, asked if this meant Donovan was staying to work overtime every day. Klaus reminded Kento to remember to be careful and avoid making victims. He sternly emphasized that the safety of his comrades must come first. Kento confidently agreed, promising to do everything possible to protect them. Meanwhile, Erna said goodbye to Yuko, saying that she would try to convince Camellia again, but admitted that they needed to be prepared for the fact that field trials would still take place. She advised Yuko to rest, wishing her good night. Yuko returned the farewell and then met Kento, who greeted her. She immediately told him about the upcoming tests, but Kento quickly calmed her down, asking her to speak more quietly. He assured her that everything was already prepared and told her not to worry. Yuko expressed relief and joy that Kento had already thought of a plan. She then asked him an important question. Could she tell Erna everything, including the fact that Kento was alive? Yuko explained that Erna was genuinely helping them and she felt guilty about having to hide something. Kento thought about it, noting that if Erna told Camellia, it could ruin their advantage. He asked for some time to think things over and suggested that Yuko focus on rescuing all 5 students and getting them to Walzard. Yuko assured him that she would do her best to complete this task. In Walzard, Kento approached Reinhardt about what to do about Yuko and Erna's situation. Reinhardt insisted that Camellia must not learn of Kento and his team's existence under any circumstances. However, maintaining a good relationship between Yuko and Erna can make their mission much easier. Kento wondered if Erna would be able to keep the secret and not let it slip to Camellia. Reinhard pointed out that, fortunately, the Camellia Knights were unaware of the connection between Yuko and Erna. He reminded them that their main goal was to save their classmates and return to the old world, which meant they should try to convince Erna to keep everything a secret. Kento decided to leave the final decision to Yuko, though he acknowledged that this might seem irresponsible. Reinhardt agreed with this approach if that was Kento's decision. In the morning, Kento said goodbye to Amanda, informing her that he would be focusing on helping Donovan for a few days. Amanda wished him peace of mind and a safe return. Kento promised he'd be back soon. Meanwhile, Camellia learned of the growing number of those she considered rebels. She noted sarcastically that some people apparently think they can get away with anything. Camellia stated that if students don't want to train, it means they are confident in their abilities. In that case, she said, it was time for a real battle. The students, hearing Camelia's words, were stunned. They began to protest, not believing the seriousness of what was happening. However, Camellia abruptly interrupted them, ordering them to remain silent. She began calling out the names of those who were to come forward. Kazuki Nida and Tatsuya Furuta were the first to hear their names. Kazuki confidently offered to show everyone what they were capable of, and Tatsuya supported him, declaring that all the spoils would be theirs. Camellia then named Tomoko Kobayashi and Akemi Sakurai, who the girls, in a panic, tried to support them by calling them by their nicknames. The last one she named was Yagi. He was shocked and began to protest, not understanding why he had been chosen. The other students made fun of him, doubting his abilities. Reinhard, observing the proceedings, asked Kento what made the chosen students stand out. Kento explained that while they weren't as outstanding as Funiyama, they excelled in academics and sports. Nida was a pitcher for the baseball club and Furuta was a quarterback for the soccer club. The two had long been an inseparable team. Tomoko Kobayashi, a top-notch hitter for the volleyball club, and Akemi Sakurai, a talented tennis player with fast and accurate shots, were also known as inseparable sisters. The last one, Yagi, was a bespectacled man, and his choice raised questions. Camellia declared that the chosen students had the honor of being the first to prove themselves in real combat. She ordered them to survive the Devil's Forest, doing their best. Kazuki confidently assured them they wouldn't let them down, and Tatsuya backed him up, assuming they'd be fighting goblins or kobolds. Tomoko added that with her help, the spoils would be plentiful, and Akemi giggled, assuring them she could handle it without a problem. Camellia, smiling, noted that they were all brave in words, but they would soon face reality. She ordered them taken away so they could begin the test. The old man, appointed as a guide, urged the disciples to follow him. Yagi, barely containing his panic, began to complain that he did not have the same physical attributes as the others. He tried to persuade Camellia to give him a more suitable job, insisting that he was better at it mentally than physically. Camellia, looking at him coldly, advised him to survive the test and report what he had seen to the rest of the students. She ordered him to obey and follow the group. Yagi tried to resist, claiming that his body was not obeying him and that he would not be able to survive in a real fight. However, the other students who remained at the camp wished the participants good luck, sending off their thoughts to Tomoko and Akemi. Kento, watching this, noted how different everything was from what he remembered from his world. Akemi quickly took the initiative, suggesting that Nida and Furuta team up to survive. Nida asked his comrade's opinion, and Tatsuya agreed, reasoning that in this world there was no point in turning up their noses at cooperation, especially when their lives were at stake. Akemi clarified that Nida and Furuta were melee warriors, which they confirmed. She then revealed that she and Tomoko were mages specializing in wind magic. Akemi then turned to Yagi, asking if he was a warrior or a mage. Yagi, looking away with detachment, belatedly responded that he was a water mage. Akemi, trying to support him, told him to pull himself together and reminded him that it was too late to retreat. However, Yagi irritably replied that he understood this, but could not stop being afraid since the real threat of death was pressing on him. Akemi tried to cheer Yagi up, sternly reminding him that if he didn't want to be killed, he had to kill himself. Yagi, however, did not share her confidence, stating that everything was not so simple. He mentioned the goblin he saw in the garrison's cage and noted that they were insane, unlike normal animals such as wild monkeys. Akemi suggested developing a strategy, but Yagi irritably replied that everything was obvious anyway. He explained that goblins never travel alone, and therefore, when meeting a group of them, you need to scare them with magical attacks or jadeite, identify the weakest ones, and destroy them one by one. If the goblins realize their opponent is stronger, they'll flee. Otherwise, they'll attack, so it's important to start with a powerful strike. Kento, following the conversation, asked Reinhard how effective Yage's strategy would be. Reinhard replied that it was generally effective, but there was one missing element. When Kento asked what exactly, Reinhard pointed out the number of goblin groups. He said that although goblins are cowardly by nature, if their troop is large enough, one powerful attack or jadeite will not only not scare them off, but can provoke them into a furious attack. Kento considered this and suggested that in that case, 2 or 3 successive attacks might be necessary. Reinhard agreed, adding that numerical superiority could also play a decisive role. However, the 5 students sent to the training are unlikely to be able to use this approach. An old man who was observing the discussion expressed his bewilderment at the fact that the guys were holding a whole strategic council. The female knight suggested that this was their first field training and they were discussing possible tactics. The old man chuckled and doubted the need for so much talk, declaring that there was no need to hold a meeting to fight a couple of macaques. At this time, Nita, noticing something ahead, interrupted the conversation with a question about how far they were going to take them. As they approached, the group discovered the place where they first appeared in this world. Nita, looking at the familiar place, thoughtfully asked if they would ever be able to return to their world. Tomoko, lost in nostalgia, remembered the cafe near the school where they often spent time. Akemi added enthusiastically that she especially remembered the delicious pancakes. The old man, interrupting their thoughts, commanded them to get out of the carriage. After this, the coachman turned around and drove away. Yagi exclaimed in panic, asking how they would return now. The old man laughed and replied that they would go on foot and announced the task. Each of them had to bring back 3 magic stones from goblins or kobolds. He warned them to hurry, otherwise they would have to stay in the forest overnight. Yagi, realizing the difficulty of the task, gasped as he calculated that they would have to obtain 15 magic stones, meaning they would have to defeat 15 enemies. Kazuki, ignoring Yagi's panic, began to fiddle with the sword and asked him how to hang it properly. Yagi, irritated, replied that he didn't know. Meanwhile, Akemi, taking the sword, was surprised at how heavy it was and doubted whether she would be able to use it at all. Suddenly, the girl knight who was watching what was happening became indignant when she learned that this was the first time they were holding a real sword in their hands. The students, not understanding her indignation, calmly confirmed that this was so. The girl knight was stunned and called it complete nonsense, not believing that they were sent on a dangerous mission without any preparation. A female knight named Fried angrily addressed her partner, Paul, declaring that they had to stop what was happening. She called sending children who had never even held a real sword into actual combat madness. Old man Paul responded by reminding her that she was going against the will of Lady Camellia. Fried quickly explained that she wasn't opposed to the order, but she believed the children needed more training. Without it, they were simply sent to their deaths. Paul reminded that their job is to prevent tragedies, but intervening until students have lost limbs or are in critical condition is strictly prohibited. This was a direct order from Madame Camellia. Fried, gritting her teeth, agreed. Then she looked at the students and began to give them instructions. She explained that a real sword is much heavier than a wooden one and emphasized the importance of standing firmly on the ground to avoid losing your balance. She warned that one wrong move could lead to injury and the wrong distance between them could cause permanent damage. She told them to remain careful and move forward. Paul added that they should go into the forest on the right, leaving marks so as not to get lost. Kazuki and Tatsuya began to advance. Kazuki called out to Tatsuya, who nodded in agreement. Kento, observing the students, noticed that they were very excited and scared. Reinhard explained that this wasn't surprising as this was their first real combat. Tension and fear were natural in such conditions. Kento admitted that just the sight of them made his chest clench. He noticed the approaching creatures and asked if they were kobolds. Reinhard confirmed this, adding that they could be dangerous. Kento was surprised to see that there were only 3 of them and assumed there shouldn't be any threat. But Reinhard reminded that when you see a kobold or a goblin, you should always assume that there are many more of them. He emphasized that even on the edge of the Devil's Forest, it was wrong to assume there were only 3 of them. Kento realized there could be other kobolds nearby, lurking in the shadows. Reinhard noted that the situation was becoming even more suspicious as the kobolds appeared to be injured. Kento suggested that they might have been attacked by other monsters. Reinhard agreed, adding that the likelihood of that was extremely high. Meanwhile, Kazuki, noticing the approaching kobolds, turned to Yagi, asking what to do. Yagi quickly suggested a plan. Sakurai and Kobayashi were to take the center and prepare for magical attacks. Nida and Furuta positioned themselves on the sides, enhancing their physical abilities. The first attack should be directed at the central kobold with magic, and then the enemies on the sides should be hit with jades. Yagi advised that it was better to aim not at the head, but at more vulnerable areas such as the limbs or body. After a close combat attack, he instructed to immediately break distance to avoid a counterattack. Kento, watching Yaga's actions, smirked and assumed that he had learned all of this through games. Kazuki prepared for the coming trial by casting a spell to enhance his abilities. He concentrated and chanted, calling upon mana, the power of the night, to imbue his body with strength. Akemi confirmed the team's readiness, and everyone began to act according to the developed plan. The attack was successful, each participant clearly fulfilled their role. After the battle was over, Kazuki, examining the defeated kobolds, confidently stated that everything went smoothly and no problems arose. After the first fight, Akemi, pleased with the result, stated that everything had been as easy as pie. Yagi nodded, noting that everything went well. Kazuki reminded them that this was only the first part of the task. They had 3 heads and 12 more remained to be obtained. Tatsuya asked Yagi to extract the magic stones from the bodies of the defeated kobolds. Yagi was indignant, asking why he had to do this. Akemi calmly noted that Yagi hadn't done anything during the fight, so now he could at least help with that. Yagi began to justify himself, claiming that his contribution was to develop tactics, and was indignant that he would have to stain his hands with blood. He mentioned that as a water mage he was absolutely indispensable to the team, but that, of course, didn't convince the others. Akemi, slightly irritated, said that it had nothing to do with the matter and insisted that someone start acting already. Akemi, sighing wearily, suggested resolving the issue by vote. Everyone voted for Yagi to take on the task of extracting the stones. Yagi, completely enraged, shouted that he had not signed up for this. At this time, Fred informed Kento that the group was surrounded. When Kento asked who was surrounding them, Fred replied that they were orcs, 10 large, dangerous creatures that 5 students would not be able to handle. Kento ordered to be ready to intervene to help the group. Fred immediately commanded everyone to prepare for battle, announcing that they were being attacked by orcs. Hearing this, Akemi asked in surprise and Yagi asked if they looked like giant pigs. Fred, noticing Paul's absence, expressed displeasure and concern about where he had gone. At this point, Baston reported that Paul had fled as soon as he spotted the orcs approaching. Kento wasn't surprised, noting that he hadn't intended to protect the children in the first place. Fred added that given the number of orcs, Paul's reaction was quite predictable. Kazuki, realizing the seriousness of the situation, cursed under his breath and suggested running away. Fred, quickly assessing the situation, ordered everyone to strengthen their physical abilities, including the mages, and prepare for a forced march to the highway. Kazuki panicked and reminded them that they were surrounded on all sides and that escaping would be extremely difficult. Fred resolutely commanded them not to hesitate and to break through before the orcs closed the ring. She ordered the students to dodge attacks and aim for the legs of the central orcs to immobilize them. The instructions were clear: run without stopping, cast spells as they ran, and never look back. The students, concentrating intently, began to cast spells, strengthening their abilities. Tatsuya urged everyone to continue on their way, and Kazuki ordered them to keep up. Akemi, urging Yagi on, warned him that he would be left behind if he hesitated. Yagi shouted in panic for them to wait for him. Fred, leading by example, cast a spell, and a fireball appeared in her hands, which she launched at one of the orcs. Yagi, shocked, exclaimed in surprise, asking if she had killed him. However, Fred explained that her magic would only delay the enemies and urged everyone to speed up. Reinhard, watching the scene, asked Kento what they would do. Kento suggested they wait a little longer to assess Fred's skills. He added that they would intervene only at a critical moment, in order to prevent any of the students from being seriously injured. Reinhardt smiled and noted that Kento was making too many demands, to which Kento apologized, adding that he would watch from a position and rely on his allies. Baston calmly assured them that this was even better, since they had more freedom of action. Meanwhile, Kazuki approached Tatsuya and asked what to do next. Tatsuya suggested immobilizing the central orc to clear the way. Both students launched an attack, but something went wrong, and Kazuki cried out in despair that the situation was getting out of control. The situation was growing increasingly tense. Tatsuya, barely dodging the attacks, cursed, recognizing the criticality of the situation. Akemi shouted at him and Kazuki in irritation, demanding that they not stand still. Tatsuya immediately noticed the danger, warning Akemi about the orc that was approaching Sakurai from behind. Freed, trying to regain control, told the students to stay alert and create an opening for a breakthrough. However, Kazuki, desperately fighting back, shouted that this was impossible since no breach could be created. Freed, not giving up, again ordered them to run if they wanted to stay alive. Suddenly, one of the orcs attacked Freed, knocking her off her horse. Falling to the ground, she struggled to get up, clenching her teeth and cursing the moment. Akemi, taking in the situation, realized the gravity of the situation and voiced the thought that they were in utter despair. Tatsuya immediately interrupted her, demanding that she focus and offer something useful. At that moment, Freed managed to warn them about another orc attack, ordering everyone to dodge. Yagi, terrified beyond belief, fled, screaming that he didn't want to die. Freed was furious at his actions, calling him an idiot and urging him not to act thoughtlessly. However, Yagi tripped and fell, becoming an easy target for the orc. The others screamed in terror, calling his name. At that moment, Yagi, paralyzed by fear, thought he couldn't allow himself to die here. But before the orc could strike, Reinhard suddenly appeared and easily cut the orc in half. Reinhard laughed loudly, calling the orc a damn pig, and declared that he would never let his friends be harmed, protecting them on Lord Kento's orders. Yagi, still lying on the ground, watched in shock. He saw how Reinhard and the others easily destroyed the remaining orcs. Yagi, not believing his eyes, loudly asked who it was and what was going on. Pointing at Reinhard, he added with trepidation that he was looking at a skeleton and wanted to know if he was an ally. Reinhard, Fred, and Baston easily destroyed all the orcs, ending the battle. Kento approached the group, apologizing for the delay and stating that he had come to save them. Kazuki, seeing him, was stunned and could not believe his eyes. He asked in surprise if it was really Kokubu standing before him, as he had been certain he was dead. Kento calmly replied that everyone would have many questions, but right now the important thing was that everyone was alive. Yagi, in his usual manner, noted with displeasure that they were clearly not okay, pointing to the blood covering their bodies. Kento advised him to use water magic to wash away the dirt. However, Yagi interrupted him irritably, saying he knew how to do it without any prompting. Suddenly, Freed, still tense, raised her sword and rushed at Kento, demanding an explanation. Kento, with a straight face, reminded her that he was their savior and asked if she really intended to point a gun at the one who had just helped them. Freed quickly came to her senses, put away her sword, and apologized. She introduced herself as Frieda Stern, a member of the 2nd Squad of the Riesenberg Kingdom's Guard Knights, and expressed her gratitude to Kento for saving her. Kento replied that his name was Kokubu Kento and explained that he had been summoned to this world along with the others, but was one of the first to be banished. Freed, noticing the skeletons, asked if he was using dark magic to control them. Kento confirmed this, but added that they would discuss it later. He also emphasized that he was not her ally and asked her to lay down her arms. Freed, still wary, asked what Kento was going to do with her. Instead of answering, Kento demanded the ring that would allow her to remove the cuffs. Freed was confused, but complied. Meanwhile, Tatsuya and Akemi were eagerly asking Kento to quickly take off his bracelets. Kento calmed them down, promising that he would free everyone. He silently noted that he could have removed the bracelets without the keys, using his abilities, but decided to hide it so as not to arouse unnecessary suspicion. Kazuki screamed with joy, feeling free. He was sure he could finally live without restrictions. Akemi shared his feelings and rejoiced, feeling immense relief and happiness. Kento apologized but stated that he was going to put the bracelet on Frieda. He carefully placed the bracelet on her hand, and Frieda did not object, agreeing with this action. Kazuki turned to Kokubu, wondering what they would do next. He suggested they go and free the others. Kento replied that there was no clear plan at the moment, and they should first leave the forest and head to the nearest town. Tatsuya expressed his doubt, assuring them that they would all be caught and face far more serious consequences than a simple exile. Kento replied that there was another country beyond the forest and added that he would arrange things so that everyone would think they had been eaten by monsters. He said they needed to change their clothes. Tatsuya breathed a sigh of relief, noting that their current clothes were already soaked with sweat and gave off an unpleasant odor. Akemi thanked Kokuba for his help and support, genuinely happy about the situation. Fred asked Mr. Kento what to do with Frida. Kento suggested taking her prisoner, assuring her that this would be the best solution. Fred noted that Frida would need to be closely monitored to prevent escape or other problems. Kento asked them to wait a little while he attended to an important matter. He treated the horse, calming it down because despite its broken legs, the animal remained alive. Kento sent her towards the boys, explaining that they were nearby. Reinhard asked Lord Kento if he wanted to turn his enemies into undead. Kento agreed, expressing a desire to test whether they would become just simple guard dogs, pets, or even friends. He put his hand to the kobold and asked if he would become his friend. Kento felt the mana being drawn out of the kobold, which made him a little wary. He approached Reinhard with a request to obtain 9 magical ogre stones for him. Reinhard asked if he needed 3 stones for each kobold. Kento confirmed that this was correct, explaining that without strengthening the stones, there would be no point in using them, in his opinion. Kento improved the kobold by changing its properties. Reinhard remarked that the kobolds had transformed into cute little animals, which surprised him. Kento agreed, but added that this was only a facade and that their abilities were far more dangerous. He invited the kobolds to try out their new bodies to test their capabilities. Reinhardt noticed that the kobolds had become incredibly fast. Kento confirmed that no one would be able to catch them now, adding that they were not only fast but also strong. The kobolds demonstrated their strength by cutting down trees with a single blow. Reinhardt realized that anyone who thought they were cute would be in big trouble. Kento said that now it won't be scary to walk around the city with such creatures, and the cuter they are, the better. He gathered everyone and announced that he would give them names, Maruto, Maruto, and Muruto, and expressed hope for their success. Maruto thanked Kento, calling him Master. Reinhardt was surprised to notice that the kobolds could speak. Kento explained that this was precisely how he imagined their abilities. Maruto, Maruto, and Muruto hugged Kento, and he felt how softly they touched him. Kento announced that they had returned and suggested they move on, saying that they would talk along the way. Tomoko and Akemi were surprised to notice the new creatures and asked who they were. Kento replied that he'd tamed several kobolds, which surprised them. Akemi remarked that the kobolds looked like toys, and Tomoko added that they were very cute. Frida said she thought her horse had already died, but apparently she was mistaken. Kento promised to tell her everything later, explaining that they needed to move as the monsters would soon smell blood. He also asked Fred to use old clothes and bracelets to confuse the enemy. Fred replied that he would do so. Frida noted that Kento was proficient in dark magic, as she had never seen an undead being able to speak. Kento calmly replied that he found it much more convenient. Frieda expressed concern, asking what he planned to do with her, adding that if she was sent to Walzard, it could lead to a war between the kingdoms. Kento suggested that if she was so afraid, they could simply throw her into the depths of the forest. Frida reacted indignantly to Kento's words, expressing dissatisfaction with his behavior. Kento, noticing her indignation, remembered how he had once been declared defective and released into the forest on the darkest night, deprived of all the resources he needed. Frida noted that despite this, Kento remained alive and well. Kento confirmed that despite all the difficulties, he had survived. He recounted how, immediately afterward, he was attacked by goblins who killed him. Frida, stunned, couldn't believe that Kento had been eaten by goblins. Kento explained that a group of over 10 goblins had torn apart his body, pulled out his intestines, and gnawed on his limbs. But before he died, he unknowingly summoned Reinhard and the others. Frida, unable to understand how this was possible, asked how he could unknowingly summon monsters. Kento, in response, asked if she had ever gone through something similar, if she had ever heard the goblins chomping as they devoured your flesh and felt the fear of death. He stressed that there was no reason why he deserved it. Kento noted that the Riesenberg Knights did not think about them and had no right to condemn their actions even if they had summoned them. Frida apologized, admitting that they were indeed wrong. Yagi sharply responded that her apologies were meaningless, since they had still kept almost 200 students and teachers without showing an ounce of sincerity. Tatsuya, without wasting time on apologies, suggested that if Frida wanted to help, then they should free everyone and send them back to Japan. Kazuki, dissatisfied with what was happening, expressed irritation, noting that they shouldn't have to go through all this trouble. He nudged Frida, which provoked a reaction from Tatsuya. Tatsuya suggested that perhaps it would be better to just kill her. Kazuki supported the idea, saying that it should be finished. However, Kento stopped them, demanding that Furuta put away his sword. He understood that they had all been through a tremendous amount of stress during their time at the garrison and did not want the situation to get worse. Kento explained that they couldn't kill Frieda just yet. She could be useful in a prisoner exchange and could also provide them with valuable information. Right now, the most important thing was to focus on returning to Walzard. Yagi, a little hesitantly, asked if everything would be okay and if they would not be thought of as slave traders. Kento confidently replied that he knew the local baron, Klaus, who had promised to receive them. Yagi, dissatisfied with this answer, asked if all this was documented, suspecting that Kento had neglected to obtain official documents. Kento was surprised, asking why he would need to draw up a written agreement. Yagi, disappointed, called him a blockhead and reproached him for not thinking of such an important detail. He also expressed doubt that the baron would change his mind. Kento assured him that everything would be fine because Walzard would never refuse to collaborate with promising people. Yagi expressed doubt, noting that they themselves were in dire need of such promising people. Kento countered, explaining that the situation was not as it seemed. He said that even when Klaus learned that Kento had no obvious abilities, he still encouraged him, claiming that he had a hidden talent that would manifest itself sooner or later. Kento asked not to compare him with others. Yagi apologized for his words. Kento continued, explaining the plan. He announced that they were heading to the fortress city of Walzard, which belonged to the Republic of Landschelt. Upon arrival, they would need to obtain identification cards from the guild. Then, having saved all their friends, they'll repeat the process. However, if Walzard runs into serious trouble, they'll have nowhere to go. Tatsuya, supporting the idea, stated that since they were summoned, they should be received accordingly. Akemi disagreed, calling Furuta a blockhead and accusing him of not listening. Tatsuya was surprised and asked what he had done wrong. Akemi explained that it was a completely different country, and Tatsuya finally understood what they were talking about. Kento, a little upset, said that even if they saved everyone, they would still have to negotiate their return to Japan. He added that they needed a place to live, and if they acted carelessly, they could die in the Devil's Forest. Kazuki expressed his displeasure, stating that they should act wisely and urged Tatsuya to stop acting stupid. Yagi noticed they'd been walking for a while, but no one had attacked them yet. Kazuki, jokingly, noted that for a bespectacled man, Yagi had spotted the situation well. Kento explained that Reinhardt and the others weren't hiding their presence, so weak monsters like goblins and kobolds would flee immediately. He added that the area was full of such creatures scurrying about. Yagi was surprised, not expecting such a thing. Kento reminded them that they had encountered orcs before when they had been attacked. Yagi confirmed that he remembered that incident. Kento reported that Walzard was about 2 days' journey away if they walked quickly. Yagi was shocked to hear that Walzard was so far away and immediately asked where they would sleep and eat. Kento reassured him that everything was prepared and suggested that Yagi go ahead alone if he didn't like the pace. Yagi immediately rejected the offer, noting that it was impossible and that he didn't even think Kento could do it. Kento replied that he could transform using his shadow and would be in Walzard in a second. Tatsuya, perplexed, expressed surprise, calling it cheats, and Yagi asked if they could also use a similar method of movement. Kento explained that only those with the element of darkness can move. Tomoko noticed that Kento had changed a lot. Kento was surprised and asked what she meant. She explained that he had seemed weak before, but now everything had changed. Kento explained that he, Reinhardt, and the others had to work on the plantation and interact frequently with adults. Tomoko noted that it hadn't been easy for him either. Fred returned and reported that he was there. Kento thanked Fred and said that they would continue on to Walzard, making short stops along the way.